our country, and our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I hope your morning is going well. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, at least 1,885 new coronavirus deaths and 57,507 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 58,877 cases per day. That is a decrease of 13% from the average 2 weeks earlier. And as of this morning, more than 29,189,000 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, while over 527,000 have died from it. The country of China has issued the world's first COVID-19 vaccine passport, which shows a user's vaccination status, recent coronavirus test results, and antibody test results as well. The vaccine health certificates were launched on Monday for Chinese citizens to download on social media platform WeChat. The certificate is also available in paper form, is not yet mandatory. So far, only 3.65% of China's population has been vaccinated. It is unclear which countries will recognize the passport, or which countries are going to be setting up their own passport systems, how those passport systems will interact, all that stuff, still in the making. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said on Monday that President Joe Biden's administration was monitoring alleged disinformation efforts tied to Russia's intelligence services undermining the Moderna and Pfizer coronavirus vaccines. Ah, yes, interesting. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that, but I guess any opportunity the Biden administration or the White House in general has to try to accuse the Russians of disinformation, they will take it gleefully. But I had no idea specifically what they're talking about. They haven't released details there. Poland, the country of Poland, has reported its highest number of new coronavirus cases in months, with over 17,000 new infections and over 400 virus-related deaths. This, in a country of under 40 million, is significant. Those are high numbers. In national politics, the state of Florida is suing President Joe Biden's administration over new directives that have halted detentions of some immigrants who have served time in prison. The complaint filed by Florida argues the new ICE guidelines violate commands of Congress by limiting immigration enforcement to terrorists, spies, aggravated felons, certain gang members, and those who recently crossed the border illegally. Florida's complaint follows a similar action filed by Arizona last month that Montana joined on Tuesday. That lawsuit was originally filed to stop a 100-day moratorium on deportations. The moratorium was blocked by a federal judge in Texas. Former U.S. President Donald Trump issued a written statement commenting on an immigration surge at the U.S.-Mexico border. It read, quote, "When I was a president, our southern border was in great shape, stronger, safer, and more secure than ever before. We ended catch and release, shut down asylum fraud, and crippled the vicious smugglers, drug dealers, and human traffickers," end quote. Trump slammed Biden's decision to stop construction of a U.S.-Mexico border wall that was, quote-unquote, working magnificently, and Trump claimed that the U.S. is, quote, being destroyed at the southern border, end quote. President Joe Biden will join the first ever meeting of the leaders of Japan, India, and Australia on Friday. Known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, representatives for the four member nations have met periodically since its establishment in 2007, but this gathering will mark the first time all four leaders will come together. Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison will all participate in the summit. An investigation into the death of Kendrick Johnson, the Georgia teenager found dead in a rolled-up gym mat 8 years ago, has been reopened, according to Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Polk. Johnson, 17, was found upside down in the mat in Lowndes County High School in January 2013. Local investigators initially ruled his death was an accident. Johnson's parents have said they think their son was killed. However, an autopsy conducted by a pathologist hired by Johnson's family determined that the cause of death was, quote, unexplained, apparently non-accidental, blunt force trauma, end quote, to the neck. The investigation could take up to 6 months. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has approved a request to extend the presence of National Guard troops at the Capitol grounds for an additional 2 months, according to the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby. Kirby said that nearly 2,300 National Guard troops will continue their deployment in the nation's capital. I'm going to pass it to you for a minute here, Jamarl. How long do you think it'll be? How long? How many more months? It's two months right now. Will it be years? Will it be the entirety of Biden's term? Or am I overthinking things? Do you have any take here?
How long? Repeat the last part of the question for me.
It's pardon me, with the presence of National Guard troops. The U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has just extended them for another 2 months. Nearly 2,300 National Guard troops continued deployment in the nation's capital. Will it be months? Will it be years?
It will be months. I mean, I got to be honest. For the first time, at least in my lifetime, and I know in your lifetime, there was a failed putsch attempt on the White House, or in the Capitol, I'm sorry. And as that takes place, yeah, there are going to be oddities associated with it, especially if they're seeing groups that are basically still trying to raid the Capitol or still trying to go after members of Congress. Whether it's the Oath Keepers, the Boogaloo Boys, these groups have a track record of violence that is prodigious. And so I'm not necessarily shocked when people get death threats constantly, and that you had a situation where sometimes, or some people may have even tried to act on those threats, that Congress would be a little dodgy and sketchy. Don't bother me in the least. How long that takes and whether or not Congress is going to do things to bring down hysteria is the question. Not whether they have security. Anybody would want security. You'd want security, Shane. The issue is, why is the American public this angry? Why are they trying to go after the Capitol? Why are they so angry at the members of Congress? Is it possible something that the members of Congress that are not doing, that the American public believes that they should be doing, like attending to the needs of that same American public? If they're not going to do that, then they might as well keep those guards there forever. Just making the point. That's not a threat. That's just saying this kind of basic mechanics of, if you are not attending to the needs of the public, and you have 300 and something million of that public, and the more those people that languish in a certain degree of depravity that they believe is generated and created by that same government, they will be very angry and annoyed at the government. You will need those troops there forever if you're not going to deal with that.
I feel like there's something a little bit more, performative isn't exactly the right word about this, but sure, I'll use it for now, performative about this, because there are coups, and then there are coups, and there are putches, and then there are putches. And if what we saw on January 6th was a putsch, that's the putsch equivalent of a 6-year-old who's getting into Lego saying he's getting into construction. That's kind of, there were people who were entering the Capitol building who were like, yeah, let's do a revolution. And then there was no possible way that what they were doing would actually be a revolution.
It's like, yeah, let's do a revolution, dog. Let's pull this off. Let's do it. We're going to pull this off right now.
Well, yes. Yeah. And I can't tell, for a lot of the people who were inside the building, I can't tell if they thought they were engaging in a revolution or they thought they were engaging in a free, impromptu walking tour of the Capitol building. And some people were more on the revolution side. I'm not trying to deny that. Some people were going in there to lynch politicians. Some people were going in there to destroy public property, using fire extinguishers as smoke grenades, etc. Other people were just kind of along for the ride, as far as I can tell. And I'm not trying to excuse what they were doing or say that they shouldn't be arrested or charged with some stuff. I guess my point here is, for the politicians to respond with a continued military presence on the Capitol grounds, it feels like if you were to respond to the kid saying he's becoming a construction worker by requiring that he get licensed or something, it's entering into their universe and giving them a sort of tacit approval that you think that they actually have a chance, or that they're actually doing the thing they think they're doing. I don't know if this makes sense, Jamarl. Do you have any take?
I don't know. I think people who are not there or who weren't, I think it can be undermined. That's all. It's one of those things where it didn't happen individually because it didn't happen individually. There's always this thing of how significant was it? How important was it? So that's I think there's an element of that on some level. But I do think there's also this thought of, if you were a member of Congress, I would imagine this was somewhat of a shocking and terrifying incident. And how do you, as Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, go to various members and tell them, yeah, we're going to get rid of security. We're going to get rid of the people who are here defending you, despite the death threats and everything else that you get on a daily basis. Yeah, I don't think you can do it. I just don't. I don't think it's practical.
I feel like it's gonna have to be a Democrat, because if a Republican does it, then the Democrats will accuse them of wanting another coup.
Yeah, they would. They would. Oh, they would.
I don't see Democrats stepping out of line on this one. But again, what the hell does this mean? The coup was one thing. Continued military presence in Washington D.C. because politicians are afraid that their toes might get stepped on by an extremely angry public. If you look at the history books, just if you step back for a second, politicians are worried that at any moment they're going to get deposed by angry crowds. That that usually is not a good, image in the history of a state or country or society or whatever. Anyway, we got headlines. I want to get back to them. Internationally, Liza Hardinaj Stubla, Kosovo's foreign minister, posted a letter announcing her resignation on her Facebook page on Tuesday, rejecting allegations in the media that her husband had bribed election officials to help her gain ballots and a parliamentary seat in the February 14th election. Haradinaj Stubla, pardon me, also resigned from her political party, the Alliance for the Future of Kosovo, or AAK. She also asked prosecutors to investigate the allegations. Acting Prime Minister Abdullah Hoti nominated his deputy, Besnik Tahiri, to her post. In Myanmar, the National League for Democracy Zamyat Lin died in custody on Tuesday after he was arrested in Yangon. He is the second party figure to die in detention in 2 days. The cause of death was not clear. I don't know. I will guess heavy treatment, but that is, of course, just a guess. And heavy treatment is a euphemism for I don't know exactly what kind of crime committed behind the scenes. Social media in Myanmar is also awash in images of a raid on a presidential compound used by railway workers who had gone on strike to protest the coup government. Images show railway workers being forced back to work at gunpoint. A Turkish court on Tuesday sentenced 5 people to life prison terms over the assassination of Russia's ambassador to Turkey in 2016. Turkish prosecutors concluded that a network led by U.S.-based Muslim cleric Fethullah Gulen was behind Karlov's slaying and charged 28 people, including Gulen. The Ankara court convicted 3 of the defendants of the charges of, quote, attempting to overturn the constitutional order, end quote, and of murder with the aim of terrorism, sentenced them to 2 separate life terms. 2 other defendants received 1 life term each for attempting to overturn the constitutional order and 15-year prison terms for aiding the murder. Mevlut Mertaltintas fatally shot Russian ambassador Andrei Karlov at a photo exhibition in Turkish capital Ankara on December 19, 2016. He was later killed at the scene there. Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has fired the country's army chief, Anek Gasparyan, several weeks after the army's general staff and senior military figures demanded that Pashinyan leave office, including Gasparyan making that demand himself. Pashinyan attempted to dismiss Gasparyan at the time, but was twice prevented from doing so by Armenia's president. Pashinyan's government said on Wednesday that the dismissal was now in legal effect, as the president had not signed the decree within the given time frame or gone to court under specific articles of the law. In Honduras news, President Juan Orlando Hernandez of Honduras promised to protect drug traffickers using the nation's security forces and law enforcement agencies and to help them flood the United States with cocaine. It feels like we're 30, 40 years ago again. The allegations emerged in federal district court in Manhattan during opening arguments in the trial of Giovanni Fuentes Ramirez, a Honduran accused of conspiring to import cocaine into the United States from Honduras. Hernandez, who has been accused for years of possible connections to drug traffickers, has not yet been charged, but in court documents filed earlier this year, American prosecutors revealed that they were investigating the Honduran president. And Hernandez is a key United States ally in the region, and the investigation could jeopardize the bilateral relationship and complicate the Biden administration's efforts to invest $4 billion in Central America to address violence and corruption, reduce poverty, and bolster the rule of law. That's what we're saying we want. I'm sure there's also some decisions we want leaders to make, some power we want to have. Anyway, last quick headline here in tech news: Russia is slowing down the speed of Twitter in order to prevent the spread of illegal content on the social media platform, specifically the spread of child pornography and content related to drugs and suicide. And the way they're doing this, in my opinion, is a little bit interesting. They are, again, slowing Twitter down, like just slowing the app down, slowing people's ability to use it. And then they're saying that if Twitter can't, if this isn't enough, if Twitter can't use the more time that they now have with the slower app to get that stuff off the platform, they will face harsher consequences and potentially just shutting off Twitter in the country. Twitter has not yet responded to comments on this story. But with that, though, we need to go into our break. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back in a minute on the other side of this break with our soapbox segment, Jamarl's monologue, and a short back and forth on whichever topic he's choosing to talk about today. Be right back.
Fault lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I'm going to point out one of the headlines, and I think I might have even put this headline down for us to hit. But either way, this is a great headline. President Juan Orlando Hernandez of Honduras promised to protect drug traffickers using the nation's security forces and law enforcement agencies and to help them flood the United States with cocaine, an American prosecutor said on Tuesday. Quote, they would, as the president put it, shove the drugs right up the noses of those gringos, said the prosecutor Jacob Harris Gutwilling, an assistant U.S. attorney in New York. And again, I love this part. They would, as the president put it, quote, shove the drugs right up the noses of the gringos. I love that. Shove that drug right up their noses. This is the president of Honduras. Now, amazing to me, after hearing something like that you would then go to a press briefing run by the gentleman's name is spokesman for the State Department, Ned Price, at the press briefing on March 8th. And he, when asked about whether or not Honduras is a partner of the United States, says the following. Right. I'm sorry, we were having a little difficulty this morning. Right here. So it says, Mr. Price, well, what I would say is that this applies to Honduras, of course, that if we're committed to fighting corruption around the world, corruption and impunity are endemic in some countries in the Americas, we believe that we have to work with our partners to address broader governance challenges first if we want to solve poverty, inequality, or inequity, lack of representation in government. I love that. Meaning, if we in the United States are going to go with our mission of solving poverty, inequity, and lack of representation in government, now, he could be talking about the United States if we're being bluntly honest, but he's talking about Honduras. Now, what is missing in this? Because he's asked, again, is he a partner, Hernandez? Because, again, most of the press conference with Ned is basically either propaganda or basically filler words, meaning the overwhelming majority of it was just inert air, meant not to give any answer at all. And in some of the cases where the press actually gets him to answer, it's just propaganda. And I mean in the literal sense of the word. Is he a partner? Hernandez, the guy who last night or yesterday, the New York Times is posting that the prosecutors are potentially looking into for drug crimes. Is he a partner? Yes or no? Look, we understand that we need to work constructively with our countries in Northern Triangle. I would hate to put it. I would be hesitant to put a label on it. I think we understand. What do you mean you're hesitant to put a label on it? Is your partner or not? What's being left out here is the important, crucial part. Zelaius. Now, this was the gentleman that was in Honduras, president. He was couped under Obama with Hillary Clinton basically given the blessing to him being taken out because he was one of those troublesome dirtbag lefties in the spirit of Hugo Chavez that had a sense of sovereignty of the country to which he found himself, and more importantly, was willing to basically use the resources of the country for the people of the country. Now, whatever his weaknesses, and I'm sure that every particular person has weaknesses, is it really the cause of the United States to back the coup? And we did back the coup. She did consider him a lefty or troublesome. And whatever she wants to put in for, protestations after the fact, she did not push for him to be returned back to the government. That wasn't something that took place. Hernandez is a response or a result for a string of occurrences. You can make a case starting with the coup of that government. It turned that place into a fire. I guess I'm trying to make the point that, is Hernandez a partner? And if Hernandez is not a partner because he's trying to stuff cocaine into the nose of gringos, was Elias trying to do that? And if he wasn't, was the coup disadvantageous to the United States? It's called blowback. The answer is yes. Would that ever come up? No. Despite the fact that what I just said is true. I could even put the Guardian articles and everything else if you need to back it up for it. It's absolutely true. You have another case of Venezuela. And Venezuela is always an interesting case to me because this is such blunt propaganda. I keep making the point, if Juan Guaido was an American or in any of the Western nations, he would have been shot or hung as a traitor. And yet, because he is our boy, our, what do you want to call it? He's basically our representative. He's our, I don't want to say he's on like Pinocchio or whatever, but he's definitely our person that is perfectly willing to kill his own countrymen, to murder as many people as he needs to, if that means he can take power. The United States is perfectly willing to back him up in that. So it's always interesting to me when we're pretending as if this guy is president of anything, has any legitimate claim to ruling anything. Most of the people didn't even know who he was. And yet they were trying to give this guy with no legitimacy at all the presidency. Think back for the moment. We're making the argument that there was some kind of election malfeasance. That's what we're arguing. Think back to Evo Morales. When Evo Morales was taken out with that nonsense by the OAS, where they basically intervened into their politics, was there a problem with the election or not? There wasn't. There wasn't. Evo, it was called a coup. It was a coup early on. And the OAS, which a large belief that the United States was basically pushing to do what they just did, to call that election into question. I'm making the point that was that election malfeasance. And if it wasn't for people pushing extremely hard to make the point that no, they were just lying, that was also a coup, when you're looking at the rest of South America, should you also take that lens with it? What about Lula and the railroading that took place, where it's clear at this point, based on the leaked documents, that the CIA was involved in putting him in jail in order for balls and arrows to take power, basically preventing left-wing figures from taking power in the various governments in South America? My argument is not that the governments are perfect. My argument is that we don't have a say-so in who should be in charge of those governments. That's my argument. And in the case of Venezuela, the propaganda is thick. It is so thick. So right here, staying in Latin America, question. Is it fair to say that the Biden administration is pursuing regime change in Venezuela? That answer is indubitably yes. Mr. Price, who never can give a straight answer, it is fair to say that the Biden administration supports the democratic aspirations of the people of Venezuela. I have no idea what that means. Our overriding goal is to support a peaceful democratic transition in Venezuela through free and fair presidential and parliamentary elections. Now, that is weird, since America apparently was backing Guaido in that contract for them to kill, murder, and capture anybody necessary to depose Maduro. You could say that was under the Trump administration, but again, I have a hard time seeing the difference between the Trump policy and the Biden policy. When Price does his typical not answering the question, he's basically asked again. So it's basically a nicer way of saying Maduro must go, basically a regime change. Mr. Price, we believe we support the democratic aspirations of the people of Venezuela. That is why we're committed to supporting the people through humanitarian measures and are also targeting regime change officials and their cronies involved in human rights abuses and corruption. Yes. Yes. We want regime change. Backing up the government with the propaganda of reasons and rationale for regime change, because understand, he's basically saying the United States, for whatever particular reason, has right to determine who is the leader of a particular country. And I am asking, why does the U.S. have that right? Who gave the U.S. that right? And how is it our responsibility to basically install somebody else into another country and put that country under threat and pressure to the point of tens of thousands of deaths as a result of our actions and our sanctions? We're in the middle of a COVID crisis. And you've basically had the Trump administration using disease as a weapon to try to undermine and destroy a government, with the Biden administration basically continuing to do the exact same thing. And you have the New York Times and other propaganda outlets backing them up in this pursuit. I mean, look, contrary to popular belief, my job, as I see it, is to deliver context to the American public that increasingly distrusts media. And I do this job because I'm sick of the wars. I'm sick of the murderous sanctions. 500,000 kids, babies, died in Iraq from the sanctions that Clinton put on. And when Madeleine Albright was asked point blank, were those sanctions valid? Were they necessary? Were they just? Do you think that those sanctions, those 500 babies that died as a result of those sanctions, did what you needed to do? Madeleine Albright's answer is basically yes. I think they were tough but necessary. Is 500,000 kids dying necessary? And if you still ended up in a war with Iraq, how can you make the argument that they were just, necessary, valid, and served any particular point other than killing 500,000 babies? The point of view is not a rah-rah for Maduro, by the way. I imagine, like all countries, especially in South America, corruption is a problem. It is also a problem here, let's be honest. But there's something to be said for the way and the rationale that we talk about that country, and the way that we're perfectly okay with taking this position that it is our right, even on some weird level of responsibility, to be able to depose a leader of another country that is not ours, that we have no claim to, and yet here we are. Venezuela has all sorts of problems going back to colonial history and everything else, but at the end of the day, what's being said about it? There's an article for the New York Times that I really want to get into that I don't have enough time to get into. But basically, the New York Times takes 4 paragraphs to basically argue Venezuela is mired in one of the world's worst humanitarian crises under Maduro through a mix of corruption and neglect that oversaw the country's decay. Then you get 10 paragraphs in, and they talk about $31 billion since 2017 being basically extricated from Venezuela based on sanctions. You have a dirt poor country, a very poor country, that you've pulled $31 billion out from sanctions, and you're shocked that the country has fallen into disrepute. This entire article, this entire New York Times piece, and that entire press conference could have been a show and a segment. Shane, look, we don't have a huge amount of time, and I'm sorry I took too much time on this one. But what are your thoughts? I mean, the New York Times piece, we're going to get back to this either today or tomorrow, where we're going to go through this entire article. But they talk about these things in Orwellian ways that drop all context in regards to what was the history of that country for the country to end up that way. And even from this American point of view, that it is our right, even responsibility, to depose and get rid of leaders of other countries, even if that means deaths of tens of thousands of people in the process. What are your thoughts? We'll come back to it, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, we view South America as effectively our domain. We view a large portion of the world as effectively our domain. And that is because for us, justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger. For us, justice is might making right. You said that we don't have the right to do these things. We do have a privilege, and it's a privilege that we make. And I view that as wrong, and in the long run, I view that as detrimental to America, because America was founded on principles, philosophical principles, that we are violating with our actions, and therefore on a very deep level, from the roots to the shoots, from the the bedrock up to the tips of our actions to where we from who we were to what we're becoming, we are violating those principles, and that is a very dangerous road to go down, because of course you risk everything if you start to lose your integrity, some of your most fundamental beliefs. If you start to act against them, then in a society, in a person, that's bad. In a society, of course, it's also very bad. You start to lose this deeply felt conviction that you're living in a place that does things that are in some senses right. Things feel fake, and you lose trust in the government. And I can't help but feel like there's some connection between that and the government's stagnation, the events on January 6th, all that stuff. It might seem oblique. Okay, our foreign policy, it's, by definition foreign to us. But at the same time, if we feel that we are doing things that are unjust abroad and at home, it makes it that much more righteous seeming to rebel against the government. And that is in a real way, and in the long run, what the current, incarnation of our government should be worried about. They should be trying to prevent that kind of thing from happening by actually acting in accordance with what we believe is right. But we need to go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro talking about an Israeli Supreme Court decision on the law of return. Be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking Israeli sort of theological politics, as the Israeli Supreme Court has ruled on the law of return, which allows anyone born to a Jewish mother who has at least one Jewish grandparent, as well as converts to Judaism or spouses of Jews, to claim Israeli citizenship on coming to Israel. So basically, a wide path open for millions of people, tens of millions of people, to gain citizenship in Israel. And the Israel Supreme Court has just ruled on this. This specifically is coming from petitions submitted by 12 people stretching back to 2005 who had undergone non-Orthodox conversions in Israel and whose request for citizenship had been rejected by the Interior Ministry. Supreme Court has courts have repeatedly delayed ruling on this, and it's gone to the Supreme Court, and they have basically ruled that you can go through a non-Orthodox conversion process. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know what non-Orthodox is. And to inform us and to talk about some of the context for this, how this is being seen and treated in Israel and abroad by different members of the Jewish community, we're joined by Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. He's a speaker, author, and rabbi. You can find his work on his new podcast, Committing High Reason. You can buy his books, including The Empty Wagon, on Amazon, and you should check out his website, committinghighreason.com. Rabbi Shapiro, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. How are you guys today?
Good, and better for having you on. Thank you for being with us. Let's get into this. Can you please briefly correct if I was incorrect in any of that? Please correct me.
No, you were basically correct to the extent that Israel wants people to think that that's what the law of return is. You see, what's missing from the formula is when you refer to Jewish community or Jewish this or Jewish that, what does Jewish mean? You see, let me tell you something. In Israel, they have a citizenship and they have nationality. Every person's registered under those two categories. There is no such thing as an Israeli nationality in Israel. It's a Jewish nationality. The goal of Zionism, more than anything else, was to change the definition of the word Jewish from a religious collective, from meaning somebody who's affiliated with a religion, to some kind of nationality. They changed Jewish from being in the set of religions like, let's say, Baptist, Catholic, to being in the set of nations like French, Kurdish, Spanish. And in fact, Israel's own website, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has an article by Victor Lieberman that says, explains what a Jewish state is. It says Jewish is a nationality, what Japan is to the Japanese, and Israel is to the, and Italy is to the Italians. Israel is to the Jews. Now, in a normal universe, it would be Israel is to the Israelis, but not in Israel. Israel is different than all the countries in the world. They have their nation state law. Forget about the law of return for a moment. I'll get to that. That says that only Jews are the nationality that has a right of self-determination in Israel. Others can have civil rights, but the right of self-determination belongs to the nation of the Jews. Now, there is no nation of the Jews. Now, here's the problem with that, and here's where the law of return gets sticky. If you have, let's say we wanted to pretend that a Baptist is a nationality and not a religion, all right? And I'm going to make a state, a country, and I'm going to call it, I don't know, Baptistan, and it's going to be the state of all the Baptists. And I'm going to make a law of return that all Baptists can come here and become citizens if they want. Here's the problem. How does somebody become a Baptist? Well, it's a religious thing. Well, what is a Baptist? You know, I know what an American is, and I know what a Frenchman is, but what's a Baptist in the national sense? Well, a Baptist is defined by the Baptist religion, and so they defined Jewish by the Jewish religion, which is why if your mother is Jewish, what kind of crazy thing is that? If your mother is, that's a religious law of Judaism. Now, what they don't tell you is that it's not true that all Jews, they changed into a national Jew. There was a Supreme Court case in Israel many years ago that was brought by a guy named Brother Daniel, whose last name was some Polish thing, I can't pronounce it, Rufizian or something like that, you know, with no, it's like all consonants in the name except for that U. And he was a Jew who converted to Christianity. And he said, look, I'm Jewish, my mother's Jewish, I just practice the religion of Christianity, I want to come to Israel to the law of return. Supreme Court said no. Even if you're born Jewish, if you practice another religion, you're not entitled to the law of return. But the rabbis asked Ben Gurion, hello, if you're an atheist, you're entitled to the law of return, right? Yes. So you could be an atheist and believe in no God and no Messiah. But if you believe in a God that created the world and that there is a Messiah, but he's Jesus, you're not Jewish anymore.
That is one very interesting exception. That is a confusing exception to it. Here's one thing I want to focus on real quick.
Yeah.
This law hinges on Orthodox and non-Orthodox conversions. Right. What is an Orthodox conversion, and what could a non-Orthodox conversion look like under this process?
Right. So an Orthodox conversion basically means, like a conversion to any other religion, you need to be religious. Okay? Now, you have to accept to be religious. If you're born and you're not born Jewish and you're not religious, you're still Jewish. But if you want to convert to the religion, you need to accept the religion. Okay? If you're born Jewish, what that means, according to the religion, is you're obligated to fulfill the commandments of the religion, the laws of the religion. Whether you do so or not, the obligation is what makes you Jewish, according to the religion. Now, if you want to convert, you have to accept upon yourself the obligations. That's what an Orthodox conversion means. Non-Orthodox conversion, there are different types of non-Orthodox. That includes conservative, reform, reconstructionist, and any other version of Judaism that could crop up tomorrow. Why not? There are various different requirements, but they don't include following you can follow you could be a Reform Jew and still be an atheist, and you're a good practicing Reform Jew because the different, they call them denominations, being Jewish means different things. So for all practical purposes, the word Jewish, when Orthodox people say it, and the word Jewish when Reform or Reconstructionist people say it, is a homonym. What about Jews for Jesus? What about a conversion to Jesus? In other words, the question is, you made a law that says somebody who's Jewish or converts to Judaism is entitled to citizenship. Tell me, what are the requirements to convert to Judaism? Whose religion are you going to accept as Judaism? The Jews for Jesus? The atheists? The Reform? The conservative? Who? Now, the truth is, the state of Israel has no answer to that because the whole law of return doesn't make any sense because it's a religious question, and the Supreme Court is a secular, non-religious entity. And although there's no separation between church and state in Israel, it would be equivalent to, let's say, having the Supreme Court in America decide whose version of kosher slaughter of animals is correct, the Orthodox or the Reconstructionists. And that's what the Supreme Court in Israel is doing.
Well, but Rabbi, I mean, whether you're talking about law or whether you're talking about religion, none of it's real. Now, all I mean by that is all of these things are just proclamations of things that people are writing down. And assume for the moment that there is an esoteric aspect of it. We don't know it. It's unknowable. So whether they write it down in law or whether it's written down in some kind of religious text, what's the difference? Can't you still write the specifics of it in your, you know what I mean? Like, why can't those two things mix in the sense that the law can basically say anything? The law could say, 3 is 4 if it wanted to. It's just something that they wrote down. Why can't they add that into the document in order to mind the gap, if that makes sense?
Well, if you have the attitude that mathematics is like what you call religion, that nobody knows anything, then yeah, law could say 3 is 4, but the mathematicians are going to say, hey, we don't look at it like that. So if you really believe in the religion, and that's what Judaism is predicated on, it's a religion. And if you believe in the religion, it means that you believe in it. Now, if the Israeli courts don't, or if you don't, that's fine. But you can't come to me and tell me what my religion says. You can tell me what the laws you make say, but you cannot tell me what my beliefs are.
Well, wait, it's not that I'm trying to tell you your beliefs, but just to interrupt real quick. I guess I'm trying to make the point, and maybe the 3 thing is horrible because math is math. I guess I'm trying to make the point that on questions of who this person is or citizenship, that why can't the law mind the religion, if that makes sense? So
wait. The law can say that you're a citizen even if you don't have a religious conversion, but it cannot say what the definition of a religious conversion would entail because that's the domain of religion, not law. These guys aren't even trained in religion. You know, if they want to say, look, the law of return applies to people even if they, regardless of what the Jewish religion says about them, go right ahead. They could do that. But that's not what they're saying. They're not talking about naturalization. They're talking about conversion to religion. So if they want to say we'll accept Jews for Jesus, Buddhists and everything as included in the law of return, let them. But that's not what they're doing. They're saying we're going to define what the Jewish religion says in terms of conversion.
And to be clear, I want to make this dead simple. In Orthodox conversion, there is a process, but that process is not, there's not like a specific Orthodox style of becoming a Jew. Basically, when you say an Orthodox conversion, what you're talking about is taking up the demands or the obligations that being a Jew puts on you. In other words, if you go through an Orthodox conversion process, you would be regularly attending Sabbath. You would be
yes.
You would be basically doing the things that a Jew would do under the under the Torah, under the broad stipulations of Judaism.
Yes. Now, the Reform Judaism or Reconstructionist Judaism doesn't even agree that there are those obligations. They look at Judaism as some kind of it's a different religion. It's just a homonym.
So based on this ruling, is it possible for all Palestinians to basically say we're going to be Jews from here on out in order to get a stake in the return to their own homeland? I know that's a weird postulation, but is that postulation true based upon the ruling?
Yeah, that's theoretically absolutely possible if they want to give up their Islamic religion, but you understand what that means. I don't know if they would want to do that. That's ridiculous.
No, I don't think they're going to do it. I'm just saying, I'm trying to a theoretical understanding of what this means or what it could potentially mean. Because you could have some Palestinians who basically say, well, fine, I'm going to, give up my right. Maybe they're not practicing in Islam in this way, or maybe they're not wed to it. I guess we're trying to get to the point of theoretically, what does it mean in the sense of what people can do and what it means in real practical terms.
If a Palestinian Muslim or born Muslim goes to a Reform rabbi or Reconstructionist rabbi, say, convert me to Judaism, or maybe they'll make their own denomination. We'll call it Palestinian Judaism. Why not? And they'll go to the Supreme Court and they'll say, this is also Judaism. Then yes. Look, That's the problem with Zionism. They say it's the Jewish state, but they don't have a definition of what Jewish means, you know?
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. The voice that you guys were listening to or have been listening to, speaker, author, and Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. You can find Yaakov's work and his new podcasts at Committing High Reason. Buy Yaakov's books, including, quote, The Empty Wagon on Amazon. And you can read more of his work on his website, committinghighreason.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going to be back with Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro in a moment.
Fault Lines. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us, and continuing to join us, is Rabbi, speaker, and author, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. And again, Rabbi Shapiro, thank you for joining us. I would like you to hear a clip. Yeah, I would like you to hear a clip. And, this gets to, I don't know, I feel like a dishonesty that is associated with our country on this issue of Israel and Palestine. And the end game. And it seems that the end game is never all that much present, despite the fact that these guys talk about this in these kind of weird Orwellian ways. Let's play the clip. This is spokesperson Ned Price. He leads the State Department press conference. He's being questioned. How is Biden different on Israel than Trump on Israel? I love this question. Let's play the clip.
But until then, fine. But until then, what, practices like these. I can go on and on and on. Last June, for instance, a young cousin of mine was shot dead in cold blood, Ahmed Erekat, on June 22nd. His body is still there. The Israelis have not turned back this to his family just to torment them. There are 67 cases like this. So I just want to ask you, what are you doing different than, let's say, your predecessor? The embassy remains in Jerusalem despite being against international law. The office remains closed. Resuming aid to UNRWA has not taken place. I can go on and on and on. So how are you different from the previous one?
Saeed, we as an administration do indeed look forward to deepening our engagement with the Palestinian people and the Palestinian leadership. I'd rather not make comparisons, but I will say that is our priority. That is our policy. As part of that,
he basically goes through and gives a non-answer. Oh, we are different. We believe in a two-state solution. We're going to stand by a two-state solution, et cetera, et cetera. But Donald Trump would basically make the same argument that we're for a two-state solution. Trump would even argue, hey, we even tried to help the Palestinians and try to make this two-state solution work, despite the fact that he didn't even contact any Palestinians. And so it seems that this is a two-state, or let's say a two-party, uniparty idea on this very specific topic that talk about it in just different shades, despite the fact that they're basically ending up with the same policy. Is there a difference between Trump and Biden in regards to Israel? And honestly, what is the end game that you see for either the U.S. or even Israel on this topic. I mean, for God's sake, the amount of water that's being destroyed, the amount of land that's being stolen and appropriated, it doesn't seem like anything is stopping anytime soon. So how do you view, this statement, which I consider to be on some level dishonest, but on top of that, what's the end game from your perspective?
Okay, as far as the statement is concerned, the only piece of content that I see in there that distinguishes Biden from Trump is that he said that they're going to engage the Palestinians. And as you mentioned, Trump embarked on a peace process without even engaging the Palestinians. So that theoretically would be at least a difference in the process, even though I am certain that Biden has no idea what the solution for this, what solution he's going to pursue, because there really is no solution as things are now. There really isn't, because we're not talking about two players, the Israelis and the Palestinians, that there's a law enforcement agency that could actually make them do something, that has the power to do that, and on their own, they need to come to an agreement, and it doesn't seem like that's going to happen so soon. You could broker an agreement, but the whole idea of America working on a peace plan is weird, because America is not a player over here. They could broker something, but unless you got the cooperation of both sides, it's not going to happen. Now, as far as the end game is concerned, the difference really between Trump and Biden is that Trump did a very, very bad thing. He portrayed himself as pro-Israel, and he said in 2016, says, give me, I think it was 3 months, I'll be able to tell whether this deal could be made. What he did was he made these things called the Abraham Accords, and then went around bragging that, hey, he made peace. Well, he accomplished something. What he accomplished was absolutely nothing. Israel was never at war with any of these countries that were involved in the Abraham Accords, and under the table, they were always cooperating with them. So as far as the problem is concerned, it didn't go anywhere. It wasn't moved further at all. Yes, there are Israelis now that go on vacation to Dubai, but that really wasn't the cause of the problem, the lack of vacation locations in Dubai for Israelis. So what Trump did was, Trump made Jerusalem the capital. That didn't accomplish anything for anybody, even for Israel. It just got them into more international hot water with the international community. What Trump did was he gave people what they wanted, and then said, okay, if you think you're wrong, but if you think this is what you want for peace, fine, I'll give you these illusions, vote for me. And there was no peace made. The problem is that first people have to define what we're talking about. Are we talking about international law? We're talking about historical rights? What rights are you talking about? We don't even know. They haven't even defined who the people are that are arguing over here. Is this the rights of the Jews to this homeland? What in the world is even a homeland? The word came up in the 1600s. What in the world does that even mean? A homeland for the Jews. What are the Jews? What does a homeland mean? What standards of law or of justice are we using over here? Nobody has defined that. That's the first part to find a solution, meaning you have to define the problem. And everybody has all sorts of different words and memes that they throw out over here. Well, this is the Jewish homeland. Well, we have historical rights. Well, we have a right to exist. All of these things, we're the Jews. What do you mean you're the Jews anyway? All of these things need to be put into place. They need to be clarified. There are Palestinians I know that say, look, I don't care not about Israel, not about Jews, not about Zionism. Just give me my house back, okay? And there are others that are talking about historical rights and right of return and homelands and safe places. So it's such a confusing issue to begin with that even the people that are fighting over it don't really understand what they're saying. I mean, just ask somebody what the word homeland means. What exactly is a homeland?
Oh, I mean, I'm assuming, they're trying to say that this is where we belong on some level. I got to be honest, though. The words to me matter less. I think it's an issue of might makes right. And everything else from the standpoint of words are just used to assuage that. Meaning, I can't act nakedly, because if I act nakedly, basically we're just stealing land. But we don't want to say that because that's frowned upon. So we will say that this is our homeland. We have a right to this. We will have the other countries that are our allies back us up on it. That's the way I view it.
But there are people who really believe that in the homeland and rights, and they're taught this from the time they're kids. And the word homeland keeps going back and forth. In fact, in the Balfour Declaration mentioned something about a homeland, something to that effect. These are other countries, not Israel, that's talking. Israel didn't even exist then. What in the world does it mean?
And when you say it originated in the 1600s, that is, hundreds of years ago. That feels old to us, but in the context of the history of the Jewish people and Judaism, that is, it's a small fraction of that time. I think that's where you're getting. Is that right, Yaakov?
It's worse than that. That they say the Bible gave the Jews this homeland. When the word homeland was invented, the Bible was already written and sealed. The word homeland in Hebrew. Ask one. How do you say homeland in Hebrew? There is no.
There's a word for it.
Hebrew word for it.
Yeah, there's no word for it. Let me ask you this before we leave, because we're about to finish. I wanted to get your perspective on something that we don't typically ask you, but I thought it may be an interesting question. Right now, there's a lot of bellicosity going between Israel and Iran, where Israel has basically said, we don't need our allies. We are willing to strike if Iran pursues uranium enrichment, despite the fact that the level of enrichment is nowhere near nuclear capacity, and Iran is over more than one time, so they didn't necessarily want to bomb. Oftentimes, it seems that this is just used for bellicosity and used for foreign policy reasons of a threat that's out there to Israel. How do you view this from a religious context? I don't think we've ever gotten to this type of question with you, and I think you might have an interesting answer from the way you view this stuff.
Well, first, as far as I'm concerned, there is no religious context over here. Israel is just as Jewish as China is, and Iran is just as Jewish as China is. It has nothing to do with any religion that I'm familiar with. It has to do with a political question. And honestly, I'm not sufficiently knowledgeable in the details of the Iran nuclear deal or their situation to be able to give you an opinion as to whether they're a threat or not.
That's fair. No, that's totally fair. It wasn't something that was we were thinking about in advance. It was more so I was just thinking about just from the way you talk about and engage this particular subject matter. From your standpoint, from here on out, what are you, we were talking about the law earlier, and not just talking about the law, talking about kind of the end result and everything else. At this point, the land that has been taken is dramatic, and it doesn't seem that the Biden administration is really going to do anything to inhibit that. The use of the term genocide doesn't necessarily seem to apply, but I don't see where this ends. And that's kind of the where I am, where it's like, if you guys want a two-state solution, okay, fair enough. But there's not enough land for two states. And you don't want a one-state solution because from this point of view of Israel, that destroys Israel. If you have Israel and Palestinians together side by side in a state, it's no longer a Jewish state, and Israel ceased to exist. It just doesn't seem like there's an out on the solution, or there doesn't seem to be a solution based on the items that are presented. Where is the solution? How would this get solved? From your perspective, how would this get resolved?
Okay. The answer is, in my view, this is a war based on ideologies, not on land, because as you said, Israel ceases to exist. Not Israel. Israel is destroyed. This is a war of ideas. What is Israel? What gives it its identity? Why is it important to exist? These ideas that people are fighting for, most of them are illusions. Most of them are delusions. And the way to go, which people don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, is to deal with the ideas and not the politics.
Perfect. The voice that you guys were listening to, Rabbi, speaker, and author, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. You can find Yaakov's work on his new podcast or at Committing High Reason. I love that. Buy Yaakov's books, including The Empty Wagon, on Amazon, and you can read more about his work on the website, committinghighreason.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe, welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would mean you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news. Oh, wow, that's a jump. At least 1,885 new coronavirus deaths and 56,507 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of 58,877 cases per day. That's a decrease of 13% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 29,189,000 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 527,000 have died from it. China has issued the world's first COVID-19 vaccine passport, which shows a user's vaccination status, recent coronavirus test results, and antibody test results. The vaccine health certificates were launched on Monday for Chinese citizens to download on social media platform WeChat. The certificate is also available in paper form and is not yet mandatory. So far, only 3.65% of Chinese population has been vaccinated. It's unclear which countries will recognize the passport. When we said 3.96, maybe basically 4%. Keep in mind, China has 1.3 billion people. So that 3% is still a huge number of people. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said Monday that President Joe Biden administration was monitoring alleged disinformation efforts tied to Russian intelligence services undermining the Moderna and Pfizer coronavirus vaccines. I saw this a few days ago. Manila Chan pointed this out on Twitter. She said she basically said something about it at one of the press conferences. That's astonishing. That's astonishing. Yeah, that's astonishing. Poland has reported its highest, and by the way, astonishing because of the level of ludicrousness associated with it. Poland has reported its highest number of new coronavirus cases in months, over 17,000 new infections and 400 virus-related deaths in the country of under 40 million. Wow. Beautiful country, by the way. Beautiful country. The state of Florida is suing President Joe Biden's administration over new directives that have halted detentions of some of the immigrants who have served time in prison. The complaint filed by Florida argues that the new ICE guidelines violate commands of Congress by limiting immigration enforcement to terrorists, spies, aggravated felons, certain gang members, and those who recently crossed the border illegally. Florida complaint follows a similar action filed by Arizona last month that Montana joined on Tuesday. The lawsuit was originally filed to stop 100-day moratorium on deportations. The moratorium was blocked by a federal judge in Texas. The former U.S. President Donald Trump issued a written statement commenting on immigration surge at the U.S.-Mexico border. It read, quote, "When I was president, our southern border was in great shape, safer, stronger, and more secure than ever before. We ended catch and release, shut down asylum fraud, and crippled vicious smugglers, drug dealers, and human traffickers." Trump slammed Biden's decision to stop construction on the U.S.-Mexico border wall that was working magnificently, quote unquote, on the working magnificently, and claimed that the U.S. is, quote, is being destroyed at the southern border, unquote. Look, as a reminder, Donald Trump was the one that basically shut down the government in order to build the wall. Now, if you were a few of Donald Trump's supporters that didn't live, let's say, in Mexico or some of these other places, or didn't work for the TSA, you might not have cared. If you were one of those people that worked for the TSA that wasn't getting a paycheck for several months because of a wall that didn't necessarily need to be built, I would imagine you had great feelings about that as your babies went hungry and as you were incapable of being able to pay your rent. Donald Trump coming out for this and making this argument about how awesome, how magnificent the border wall was. Nonsense. Nonsense. If the public believed that, they would have kept you in office. But after 500,000 people died, not so much. President Joe Biden will join the first ever meeting of the leaders of Japan, India, and Australia on Friday, known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. Representatives for the four member nations have met periodically since its establishment in 2007, but this gathering will mark the first time all four leaders will come together. Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison will all participate in the summit. An investigation into the death of Kendrick Johnson, the Georgia teenager found dead in a rolled-up gym mat 8 years ago, has been reopened, according to Loudoun County Sheriff Ashley Pollock. Johnson, 17 years old, was found upside down in the mat in Loudoun County High School in January 2013. Local investigators initially ruled his death was an accident. Johnson's parents have said that they think their son was killed. An autopsy conducted by pathologists hired by the Johnson family determined that the cause of death was unexplained, apparent, non-accidental, blunt force trauma to the neck. The investigation could take 6 months. So let me get this straight. An investigation into the death of Kendrick Johnson, a Georgia teenager that was found rolled up in a gym mat. Did he roll himself up in that gym mat? Like, how is this an accident? That's an astonishing thing. Who rolled him in the gym mat? That's the first question. And the people who rolled him in the gym mat, did they have any culpability in his death? And if they rolled him up in the gym mat, shouldn't you try to find those people? I guess I'm getting to the point that I don't believe for a moment that he rolled himself into the gym mat and died. And from the standpoint of the blunt force trauma, that should also get across that this wasn't necessarily some kind of incidental death or an accident. The interesting part here is, why didn't they know that this was blunt force trauma to the neck? Why did it take the family's investigator to find that out? Understand what I'm asking. It's not secret. It's not something that you have to decipher the clues. Ultimately, if you do an autopsy, you should be able to discern, hey, there's a blunt force trauma here. And hey, who rolled this kid up in a gym mat? And hey, maybe there's a murder here. As opposed to looking at this as accidental. It's astonishing that you would come across the conclusion that this is accidental. The family, under no circumstances, should have to do this. They shouldn't have to do this. And the cops, the Keystone cops, who apparently couldn't necessarily discern what a blunt force trauma was, this is appalling. Shane, what are your thoughts? I mean, am I being too harsh on this? A person apparently rolls himself up in a gym mat and dies. That's what I'm coming away with this. This is like the magic bullet for Kennedy. And the cops in this situation are like, it's an accident. It's an accident. And the parents legitimately ask, how did he get rolled up in the gym mat? Who rolled him in the gym mat? And you couldn't tell that there was blunt force trauma to the neck when you did your investigation? Why couldn't you tell that? This is, look, I guess, Shane, am I making too much out of this? Like, am I being too aggravated about this? This just seems extreme.
Jamarl. No, you are. It happens all the time. Happened to me a couple of times. This is just, it happens every day.
That's horrendous.
That's all.
I mean, this puts me in mind, wasn't there like a suicide or something where the person was hung and they were like, yep, he did it himself. And it's like, wait a minute. How did the person get themselves there? It's stuff like this that happens where you're like, are you insane? How do you come to these conclusions?
Yeah, this doesn't make sense. I would need a pretty detailed goddamn explanation of exactly how this happened for me to accept it as, you know, a natural accident and not a homicide of some sort or another, just to be blunt about it, you know, to be specific. But we haven't gotten that yet. And again, like you're saying, it is horrifying for the family to have to push for an investigation into what is patently clear on its face. Merits an investigation. Who did this? Why did they do this? What was the process? You know, most importantly, who's responsible?
Who rolled him in the mat?
Himself, who's responsible?
Seems to be the most basic question in the world. How did he get rolled in the mat? Who did that? Do you think he did it to himself and died? I'm just going to roll myself into a mat and nobody will ever know what's going on. I don't think that's it. I don't think for a moment that's it. And so it's like, you guys need to explain how we got into that mat before you do anything else and close this case. And if you close this case and call it an accident and you don't explain that, that's problematic, to put it mildly. And the reason I guess I'm putting so much emphasis on this is because it seems like they didn't care about the kid's life. That's the point I'm getting at. that 17-year-old didn't matter. Or at the very least, it didn't matter enough to investigate as if it was a real crime. I keep making this point. Cops kill 1,000 people a year. And no, I'm not saying a cop killed this person, but I'm saying that there's some lives that seems disposable. And disposable to a point where they don't necessarily matter. I'm saying this kid, to this kid's family, his life mattered. You often hear me say none of this stuff matters and all of this other stuff. And to a certain context, it is true. But that is not true from the human context. And in this very particular case, they had a 17-year-old, a child, that dropped dead. And the cops basically said, clean death, despite the fact that they did not know and did not have answers to many of the things that apparently took place around that case. That's appalling. That's appalling. U.S. Secretary of Defense, the guy who Joe Biden couldn't name, Lloyd Austin, has approved a request to extend the presence of the National Guard troops at the Capitol grounds for an additional 2 months, according to the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby. Kirby sent 2,300 National Guard troops, or says 2,300 National Guard troops will continue their deployment in the nation's capital. Now, Shane, you disagree with this. You thought that this was an overstatement. Do you believe that any of the troops should be at the Capitol, or you believe that they should get back to business as usual? What's your thoughts?
I think you should have a moderate amount of troops at the Capitol, and frankly, be on the watch for more threats. Be on the watch for, random groups of people on the way, and certainly have National Guard at hand, ready to call in. But I think it's imposing. I think it is visually imposing to have thousands of troops stationed at the building and in the area around there to ward away the potential threat. Again, though, my broad take is if we step back for a second and look at history with a 100-year, 1,000-year span, you're describing a state that, after an attempted laughable coup attempt, whatever that was, is now stationing thousands of guards at the Capitol, at the the head of the building of the head of state, effectively, in order to prevent another future uprising. And this is going to be going on for who knows how long. So from the grand view of history, it just doesn't look good. It's not none of it's good. The January 6th wasn't good. The response to this isn't any better, in my opinion, because what does that do to how does this make you feel about politicians? I guess that's my take. If your take is, okay, they're acting out of self-interest, I get that, but is this justified? And beyond that, how do you feel about it?
Is it justified? Justified is impossible to answer. As for how do I feel about it, I don't have any feelings about it. I just feel like there was you can call it comical putsch attempt on the Capitol. I don't think the people who were there would call it comical, especially with McCarthy screaming at the height of his lungs at Trump. It gets across a certain level of severity in the way that they were looking at it. I also don't think the people with the noose going for Mike Pence were jokingly going after Mike Pence with the noose.
No, I said laughable. I just want to be very clear here. I didn't say comical. I said laughable because
okay. Okay, well, laughable.
It was not successful. And I think I would make a mockery out of both. I would make a mockery out of it as an attempt.
Okay, well, laughable. I don't think the guy with the noose was laughable with Pence. I mean, whatever word you want to use for it. I mean, I understand your point. Your point is, if this is a putsch attempt, this is the worst putsch attempt ever. I think that's your point.
Yes.
And that the people who were going there didn't entirely go there with the notion that we're going to take it over. Like, what I mean? It was kind of like one thing led to the next. Like, oh, they're running it to the Capitol. Let's go into the Capitol. I think it was that. I think you might have some people there, like that was organized in their thoughts. Clearly you did. The Oath Keepers, you might have had Boogaloo Boys, some people there with walkie-talkies and stuff like that were clearly organizing their aspect of it. But the majority, no. I don't think the majority were. But I don't think you need the majority to be there for violence to erupt and ensue. And so while I accept your take that, look, this was somewhat of a laughable putsch attempt, if it was indeed a putsch attempt, I still think there was a certain level of severity and violence that went along with it. And as such, I don't think it's insane that some of the guys will function that way. I think you and I can meet in the middle, though, on this notion of how much force is there necessary in order to prevent something like that from happening again. And is 2,000 too many? Is that too imposing? Is that really the impression and image that you want to give to the Capitol? This brute force Capitol. So I do get that. And I think we can meet in the middle somewhere on that. Yeah, I'm not a hardliner on it. Go for it.
One quick thing here, and we'll probably come back to this at some point in our conversation with our next guest, Daniel Lazare. It's just, I think I don't want to misquote you, so please correct me if I do. you said something like you can't make a judgment on this, or judgment would be impossible on this. But politics.
No, subjective. Like you said, is it justified? And I said calling it justified is kind of difficult, impossible, because it's going to be dependent on who you talk to. You would say no. I would say yes. I would be comfortable to say yeah.
Politicians are the entire business of politicians, other than getting reelected, and even then, is making judgments on things and asserting that some things are justified and other things aren't. And we, as spectators in the political process, are the whole, the bread and butter of the work that we do is not just talking about the facts, but talking about whether responses to things and certain actions that people are engaging in are justified or not. Clearly mass murderers and serial killers are not justified in doing what they do.
This is not mass murder. Them putting people on there is not mass murder. I don't even think it's comparable. I mean, there's some things where you're going to get into margins and areas of grayness. Mass murder typically is not gray. I would say that putting troops there is gray. And while you say that, their job is trying to figure out justification and everything else. You're basically asking me, is it justified? And I'm saying if you take 10 people, those 10 people will have different answers. If you take 100, those 100 people will probably have different answers.
I was taking one person. I was taking you.
Oh, well, my answer is yes. But I answered you straight. I said yeah. But whether it's justified or not, I don't know if that's knowable. I mean, the first time we had this conversation, I told you I had no issue with them doing it. And I still don't. Right. The put your temp thing. But yeah, so I can answer you directly on that. But I guess my point is, I take your point as fair because I do think it's subjective. That's the point I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to make the point that I don't necessarily destroy your point of view with it. That I take it as fair. I take it as very subjective. So that's the way I look at it. I was trying to give a decent, straightforward answer to it. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment, as Shane said, with the one and only Daniel Lazare for a continued conversation on this very specific point. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here.
Real opinions for real people.
Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out,
we actually let them expand on their views.
What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well.
And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. There's a question that comes up about the filibuster. I am one of those people that think the filibuster should be utterly and entirely destroyed. If the Biden administration wants to actually pass the $15 an hour minimum wage, if he actually wants to implement his agenda, then he needs to explain to the American public how he's going to do that. He's taken one opportunity after the next to put fake roadblocks in his way, either not telling Kamala Harris to overrule the parliamentarian in regards to the $15 minimum wage and whether or not it should be in budget reconciliation, to not get Joe Manchin on board in order to back the policy, to not get rid of the filibuster. I'm making the point that Joe Biden has all of the power and authority to get his diminutive plan for the American public across the finish line, providing he is willing to augment, get rid of, and entirely destroy the filibuster. It is a fake defense. It is a fake defense or security because in the very next administration, a Republican can blow that filibuster away and implement the Republican priorities that they want. That depends on how discerning they are and how insistent they are in trying to get it across. I'm making the very basic point that if Joe Biden's presidency want to continue, meaning if he wants to be able to get things accomplished, if he does not want the Republicans to take it in the midterms, or at the very least take the Senate, then he is going to have to deliver for America. And the filibuster is the thing that is standing in his way of doing it. And by the way, it's a thing I would even argue that he wants there to put a limit on the expectations of this administration. To have a conversation about the filibuster, because in my point of view, is that the Senate is already a minority institution. You already have 2 senators for each state. So the state of California and the state of Rhode Island both get 2 senators. You don't need to add a filibuster in that situation. To have a conversation about the filibuster and whether or not I am being too strong in saying get rid of it, we're joined by Daniel Lazare, independent journalist and author best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written a number of books, including From Moses to ISIS, The Intelligent Heretic's Guide to Monotheism, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, the filibuster. I want you to listen to Jen Psaki for a moment. I want you to hear this conversation. Because the question is, if Joe Biden really is pushing for the $15 an hour minimum wage, he said it multiple times as a candidate, he said it in the debates with Trump, he said it as President Joe Biden, and over again, and yet, at first wisp of opposition, he falls over on it. Now, Psaki is still continuously saying that Biden is still backing the $15 an hour minimum wage, and if so, Biden needs to explain how he's going to get it passed, because Psaki is also saying things like this. Let's play the clip on Jen Psaki on the filibuster.
Does President Biden agree that there needs to be tweaks in how the filibuster is utilized?
Well, I'll first say the president's preference is not to get rid of the filibuster. Look at what we've been able to accomplish in the last 6 weeks. He's on the verge of passing a historic relief bill that's going to cut child poverty in half and create 7 million jobs. We'll have enough vaccines for all Americans by May. 13 cabinet nominees have been confirmed. We rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. We ended the discriminatory Muslim ban. He's met with members on both sides of the aisle in the Oval, and he wants to continue to work on a bipartisan basis.
If you notice, most of the things that she noted were not laws that were passed. These were things that could be done through basically executive order or presidential purview. And she basically dodges the point about, is he going to do something about the filibuster? Because what everybody in there knows that if she doesn't do anything about the filibuster, Joe Biden's administration is basically done. Anything that he's going to have to get done is going to be through budget reconciliation. And how many times you could do it, what you can use it with, are all going to be limited. And if he can't deliver for the American public is going to take him out on a rail piece by piece, starting at the midterms and going into the next election. What are your thoughts? The filibuster, I know your point of view is that it has to be a far larger change in regards to the way we go about our politics, even to the point of a revolution. But the filibuster, I would argue, is one of the key components that would make this country far, far better if it was removed, at the very least from the standpoint of almost a parliamentary system, even though it's not, almost, in the way that it's being actioned from the first house and the second house. What are your thoughts? Am I being too, what's the word for it? Am I putting too much emphasis on the filibuster as a plan of action? Or no, am I right that they need to get rid of the filibuster if there's any chance, if Joe Biden has any real intent of getting his policy agenda accomplished?
No, I think you're actually entirely right. You really have put the finger on the problem. Joe Biden likes the filibuster because it gets him off the hook. It gives him an excuse. He doesn't really want a $15 minimum wage. So the filibuster, enables him to have it both ways, to say, no, I want the wage, but secretly I'm happy it won't get through Congress. So you're right. The filibuster is a monstrosity, but then the Senate is a monstrosity. As you pointed out, California and Wyoming have the same number of votes, i.e. 2, but California's population is 69 times greater than Wyoming's. California is also a minority-majority state, whereas Wyoming is lily white. California is heavily urban, like most of the rest of the country, and Wyoming is a rural, grassland. So the Senate is just not what America is. It's not what America looks like. It presents a grossly distorted picture of what the country is like, and it's extremely undemocratic. I mean, the statistics are amazing. 54% of the country lives in just 10 states. I think it's 83% of minorities live in just 10 states. They are outvoted 4-1 by the minority in the remaining 40. That's just an atrocity, really.
So I hear you. I mean, and this is something we've gone back and forth on before, not specifically the Senate, but a broader process of constitutional reform that you want to engage in. We've gone over that half a dozen times, it feels like, at this point. With the filibuster, it seems to me that it is a monstrosity, mainly because it's being abused. The way that it is used, of course, is if one party wants to slow down and effectively shut down legislation pushed by the other party, they can do so, even if the other party has a technical majority. The end consequence of it is to slow down to a snail's pace, or even slower than that, the whole process of deliberating on laws, which is why in the long term, Congress has gotten less and less effective at actually getting things done. And if it's going to get done, it's usually done either by the courts or by presidential fiat through executive orders. So I see that, and yet at the same time with the filibuster, it seems to me like just because one party has 50 votes, if you get rid of the process whereby either party can engage in some form of pushback, some way to keep that process from going through. You have supermajorities for a reason. You have 60 vote thresholds for a reason, and it's to make sure that any party with a slim majority can't just get whatever they want done, because of course that sets us up for a massive pendulum swing from one administration to the next, where it's not just foreign leaders that can't trust, domestic leaders in the states because of their volatility and because of how frequently they go back on what the previous administration had done. It sets us up for that same process domestically, which, you guys might disagree with. In fact, I'm sure you do in your own ways. But Daniel, what's your take on that thought process? The filibuster seems to have been heavily abused, but at the same time, I think we need something like it. Not the filibuster, because it wastes time that could be much better spent pushing new bills that do good for Americans, but some process like it. What's your take?
No, I mean, I believe in an absolute total dictatorship by the majority. I mean, I think that 51% of the population says, want to ban plaid sports jackets, they should be able to do so. If they want to ban crew cuts or mini skirts or whatever they want to do, they should have the freedom to do so. And the 60 vote threshold, the way the Senate works is it allows 41 senators representing as little as 17% of the U.S. population to veto any measure sought by the other 83%. It's a minority dictatorship, and I believe in a majority dictatorship. The more totalitarian, the better. And the reason I believe that, I'm kidding around, but the reason I believe that is I believe that the people, the Democratic majority, should have the ability to take the country where it thinks it wants to go. I mean, in Great Britain, for example, 51% of Parliament, wants something, they get it. And in Britain, the problem is not wild swings from one end of the spectrum to the other. In fact, if anything, the system is too stable. It's too conservative, too centrist, too tradition-bound. So democracy does not necessarily mean wild swings. It can just as easily mean the opposite. But if the majority of the people decide democratically that they want to implement a certain change, they should have the freedom to do so, knowing that after the next election, the majority may change its mind, or a new majority may head off in a new direction. But that's how societies progress.
And Daniel, just to put a point on that before we go into the break, 72% of America wants to expand Social Security. 69% want Medicare for all. 67% want a $15 minimum wage. 67% want to legalize marijuana. 64% want to tax extreme wealth. 64% support unions. 63% want a Green New Deal. 58% want to cancel all student debt and make state colleges free. We can't get into that. And honestly, we can't get into that because of a tyranny of a minority. And I get we consider the political parties, the leaders, and everything else. But at the end of the day, if you had put that stuff up to just a straight vote, I would wager to you that many of those policies by now would be into law. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment, continuing with Daniel Lazare.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking the nature of democracy, the filibuster, whether we should repeal the filibuster, whether we should slow it down, what we can do about that, and as well as just more fundamentally, the role of states and the citizenship of the United States in deliberating on bills and getting politics done in general. We're joined for that conversation by Daniel Lazare. He's an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He has written as an author a number of books, including From Moses to ISIS, The Intelligent Heretic's Guide to Monotheism, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. And you can follow him on Twitter at DHLazare and find his column on the weeklyworker.co.uk, strategic-culture.org, and many others. Daniel, the pejorative for majoritarian rule is mobocracy, and I'm cautious about it too. And I would use that pejorative to describe it sometimes as well. You gave a brief defense of the idea that if 51% of the public wants to ban crew cuts or mohawks or whatever they want to, they should be able to do so. I think that's ridiculous. I don't want to live in a country where, frankly, the majority of people can tell me what I'm allowed to do or not allowed to do. I like the idea that we have some basic rights. And this is for a couple of reasons, not just one, that I think that if you took the majority of people's population at any given point in time, at any given point in history, usually it would be wrong in critical ways. And if it were put into stone and forced to be that way for the longer duration, that we would still be in a kind of bad place as a society and as a world, but also, frankly, because of propaganda. If you have private media corporations or public media corporations, whichever, if you have media conglomerates that are able to steer the opinions of the masses, then what you have effectively is a hidden oligarchy that brands itself as a democracy, that brands itself through majoritarian rule, but really is driven by the interests of a select few. And I do not see how you get around that. Even if the majority itself were to create its own media organizations, how would they be run? Who would be deliberating on the editorial policy? It seems like you get into a sort of recursive negative feedback loop or something like this. And I don't mean to put it too technically, where you're still stuck with the same problem. And I worry that we would live in an oligarchy that brands itself a democracy. Frankly, we already are in one, but I worry it would get even worse because of the nature of propaganda. If every person, and this is impossible and probably undesirable, but if every person were somehow a perfectly self-consistent, rational agent that could respond to their own interests and perceive with, in an instant, the interest of everybody else and could work out game theoretic, whatever, resolutions of these problems, if we were in that world, I guess we'd be closer to that being a workable solution, but we're definitely not. I'm not sure we want to be. I've gone in a bunch of different directions here, Daniel. I want to give you time to respond. What's your take?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I agree that I don't want to see Congress ban Mohawk haircut or plaid sports jackets. I mean, that'd be crazy. I want to give them a Democratic majority the power to do so, but I'm also quite confident that the majority of people would not want to do that because they're sensible, they're democratic, they understand there's no point in getting into that kind of silliness. But I want a government with that's as transparent and simple and responsive as possible, because the simpler and the more transparent it is, the fewer places there are for special interests to hide. I also want a government which allows multiple political parties. Americans have been voting for the two same parties for, 170 years? That is insane. Other countries, new parties rise and fall overnight. Americans are prohibited, effectively, from organizing a new party for better than a century and a half. Everyone hates the Democratic-Republican system. Everyone hates those two parties. Polls show the great majority of Americans yearning for a third party, if not a fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh party. But our system is so convoluted, so unresponsive, so restrictive that it denies them that basic freedom. It's a tyrannical minoritarian system. And when you ask who would edit the newspapers, you could have privately owned papers, you could have party-run papers, you could have any kind of paper you want. But what I want is the democratic freedom for people to organize in simple, direct, unencumbered ways. When you talk about minority dictatorship, the problem is not only the Senate, it's also the Electoral College, which triples the weight of lily white bastions like Wyoming or the Dakotas. You have a Senate, which is based on, which says a Supreme Court in which justices are appointed for life. So Amy Coney Barrett will very well, might very well be on the bench until the 2070s or 80s. I mean, that's completely bonkers. You have a gerrymandered House. You have a minoritarian system. This is what led to the Civil War, by the way. During the Civil War, before the Civil War, the number of large-scale slaveholders in the U.S. was actually surprisingly small, only a few thousand. Yet they were able to use the constitutional levers to completely dominate the federal government. And there was no way to stop them, which is why the country rose up in revolt and fought a bloody civil war in which one person in 40 lost their lives. That you shouldn't have to do that. You should be able to have a plain democracy where the majority gets its way, and the only check and balance are regular elections. Anyway, that's
well, I agree with that. I mean, because I don't know where else you go, and I understand the point of I do get trying to give the minority a voice, but like I made the point before, the Senate is a minority voice. California has 2 seats. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. If California was a country, California get 2 senators, just like Iowa, which is not the 5th largest economy in the world, maybe the 1,000,000th economy in the world, and yet they get just as many senators as California. And when they're in the Senate, Iowa can basically block something that California wants. And maybe you may want that on some level in order for the best interest of Iowa, but is that in the best interest of the United States? Especially when this keeps going on. I mean, like you said, the gerrymandering in and of itself, again, that gets to another level of a layer of difficulty of trying to make getting to the involved into the electoral process. Even the money that can be spent in the elections themselves, like all of these things speak of a gamed electoral process where what the individual wants and what's in the individual's best interest is not even something that is necessarily advertised to that individual. If you're talking about the amount of money that corporations can spend to get them to go one way or the other, that is not necessarily in their best interest. Like, all of this is problematic. And so getting rid of the filibuster seems small in comparison of the entirety of the whole edifice. And let's be very clear. You had a situation before, I think before the 1970s, the filibuster was barely used. And then you get into the 70s where they create this two-track system where, in one sense, it's like, all right, we can have multiple bills up. So instead of the filibuster stopping all business of Congress, 2 tracks can be done. Multiple bills can be done at once, right? I mean, Daniel, am I wrong on this? And the moment that took place, it exploded. When they realized they could use that as a political weapon to basically draw down and take down the larger share of Congress and what the larger share of Congress may want, they started using it constantly. It became just a political weapon. And 60 vote became a norm when it was never meant to be a norm. Please, Daniel, tell me if I'm wrong on this.
You're absolutely right. I mean, government is getting less efficient. The ancient machinery, this machinery is 233 years old. I mean, it dates from the age of the of powdered wigs and silk knee breeches. And the ancient machinery is now seizing up, and just freezing. And as a result, the growing use of the filibuster shows how it's growing. It's becoming less responsive, less efficient, less democratic as time goes on. You just can't. Americans can't keep going this way. I mean, Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, he represents 0.2%, 0.27% of the U.S. population. That's one person in 366. Yet he is effectively the president. He's running the country. I mean, a tiny, infinitesimal minority elected him, but somehow he's got the power. And this is just irrational. It makes no sense. It's harming the vast majority of Americans. American society is coming apart at the seams. It's exploding. It's doing more and more poorly. It can't accomplish the simplest things because the machinery is so astonishingly out of date.
Voice that you guys were listening to is Daniel Lazare. He's an independent journalist and author, best known as critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written a number of books from Moses to ISIS, The Intelligent Heretic's Guide to Monotheism, The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. You can follow Daniel on Twitter at DHLazare and find his column on the weeklyworkerco.uk, strategicculture.org, and many others. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. I followed a case going all the way back since its inception, and this has to do with Lula da Silva. Lula da Silva in a case called Operation Car Wash, which was basically found by Glenn Greenwald to be a dodgy play at getting rid of da Silva from the political space so one Bolsonaro could basically take power. That worked. However, all of this was revealed when Glenn Greenwald basically showed leaks from communications behind the scenes with the people involved in this, meaning the judiciary, the judges, and whatnot. They were involved in making the choices on putting Lula in prison. The wild part about this is he even goes to the judiciary itself that was basically threatened by the military when some of the members in making choices thought that there would be a coup if they chose one direction versus another. This case was brought to fruition, I believe it was yesterday or day before yesterday, when the judge annulled the charges or the cases that were against Lula, making Lula da Silva eligible to run in the election against one Bolsonaro. The interesting part about this is that Bolsonaro would have lost that race if Lula would have been in that race, which is the reason why they took so much efforts to put Lula in prison. This also included help and influence by the U.S. in this process, with the CIA apparently hands being all over it. But the cases are annulled. The politics in Brazil has gotten that much more fascinating, and it is unclear, even though it is expected, that Lula da Silva may actually run against Bolsonaro. This is fascinating politics. In order to have a conversation about it, we're joined with Leo Flores. He's a political analyst and Latin American campaign coordinator at Code Pink. Leo, welcome to the show, man. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me back on.
No, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I've been chomping at the bit to have a conversation about this story. I was enamored by this, to put it mildly. Talk about applause. And, you can't necessarily make up for the time the person was thrown in prison and everything else. And you can't make up for the time that the attacks were leveled against him and everything else. However, this is a new day or new breath of air in Brazilian politics. Am I wrong on this? I mean, definitely give your take and give your impressions.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Lula da Silva remains the most popular politician by far in Brazil. And you were right. And this Operation Car Wash, which was really supposed to be a corruption investigation into Brazil's oil company and its construction industry, it either spiraled out of control and focused on Lula and also former President Dilma Rousseff, who are from the same party, the Workers' Party, or that was the intention from the start to bring them down. And we have, good evidence for that because of a leak of telegram chats between the prosecutors and the judge in the case. There was so much malfeasance going on in this case, but now that seems to be behind us, and with the annulment of Lula's conviction, and Lula is now really set to become the next president of Brazil in elections next year if polls hold, and if he chooses to run. He hasn't said what his plans are, but the expectation is that Lula's going to run in those elections. And a poll that just came out pretty recently has him up 8 points on Jair Bolsonaro, the current fascist president of Brazil.
And back in 2018, I believe Lula was up 20 points, before this stuff kicked into high gear and he was disqualified. And recent polling has Bolsonaro, just his general approval rating, pretty bad. Past couple of months, past 3 months, he has received consistently in the bad, terrible range in terms of his polling. 45% people, 47% in that range. 40 to mid 40s range of people who say he's a bad, terrible leader versus 31, 33, et cetera, saying he's good or excellent, in the approval range. So in other words, he is widely disapproved of by the public at this point. Lula still remains a popular candidate. What would he be running on? This is obviously speculation, but if he was recently vindicated in this whole process, he has the political wind at his back. Like you're saying, it seems like he is the presumptive next leader for Brazil. Where would he take that administration, in your perspective, Leo?
Well, I think Lula, and then following his terms in office by Dilma, one of the things they really focused on was hunger and also extreme poverty. So they had these very popular programs that Lula did. One was called Bolsa Familia, which basically gave money to families that were sending their children to school to help them with the cost of living. And so we saw huge decreases in hunger. We saw huge decreases in poverty when Lula was in power. And let me just actually use Lula's words here, because he gave this great quote the other day, pretty recently, but before the annulment of convictions. And he says, "I was the victim of a great judicial scandal. The judicial system wanted to end the Workers' Party, his party, the Workers' Party government, because they didn't want Black people to have a voice in government. They didn't want the poor to be lifted from poverty. They didn't want domestic maids to have a daughter or son in university studying. They don't accept that, the ruling class," end quote. And so I think that's kind of the focus that Lula will bring, a renewed focus on the people who are most oppressed and suffering right now in Brazil. And it's a complete contrast from Bolsonaro, who's really someone who, makes corporations and makes the oligarchy the focus of his policies, and they've benefited greatly from his terrible 3 years in office so far.
One of the cases that came up, or one of the interesting tidbits of information, had to do with the judge that had to make a choice on whether or not to put Lula in prison. And the military basically ends up threatening the judiciary. The judiciary, in this case, starts making choices, and some of those choices end up with Lula being put in prison. And this was stuff that came out in the book. So right here, Villa Boas also confessed to there being pressure from the business and banking community for the military to intervene during Lula's judgment. Another book, Owns describe how the Supreme Court and Workers' Party faced an imminent threat of military intervention, a dark scenario during the 2018 election. I mean, this was utterly astonishing stuff. I mean, even to the point where, like I said, the judiciary was concerned that there was going to be a military coup if they didn't necessarily take action to put Lula in jail. Does this mean that Bolsonaro and the military component of that country has been, let's say, undermined by Bolsonaro's time in that office, where the judiciary is losing a certain degree of, or gaining a certain degree of clarity, or let's say independence? Right here, the generals reveal how a group of 15 senior generals drafted a text threatening in tone, which was posted on social media by Villa Boas and read out on air shortly after by anchorman William Bonner during Globo Nacional's, Journals Nacional's flagship news program. This occurred the night before a crucial Supreme Court habeas corpus vote, which, had it passed, would have allowed Lula to remain free and thus able to run for the presidency 6 months later. It was defeated by a single vote of a visibly worried Minister Rosa Weber, who stated that she was voting against her opinion in light of the threat from the military. That's astonishing. So what does this mean now in this context? Does this mean that they're less concerned? Does this mean that some people have grown a spine? Does this mean that the number of the tens of hundreds of thousands of people that have died from COVID have given a new day in Brazilian politics? Like, what does this mean? Like, how should we frame this, especially from the context of a judiciary that was terrified prior, that ends up putting Lula in prison, versus now a Supreme Court that basically annulled it, or Supreme Court justice that annulled it, seeming with a certain degree of courage? Frame this for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are good questions. And really, I think it's less a question of people growing spines and more a question of fear of what's in these leaked Telegram chats. Because really what they show is complete, and I hate using this word because it has weird context here in the U.S., but it's collusion basically between the prosecutors and the main judge in the case against Lula going back, 5 years or so. And that guy's name is Sergio Moro. He was a judge, and then he became he was on the cabinet of Bolsonaro before having a falling out with him. But basically, Moro illegally instructed prosecutors in the case. They held dozens of secret meetings, and also illegal meetings with the FBI. And he was basically not just he oversaw the investigation. He said he gave the go-ahead to wiretapping Lula. He then ruled on what could and couldn't be presented as evidence. And then he was the judge in a trial with no jury. And so, there are certainly elements within the judiciary that are playing right into the hands of the other, sectors of the Brazilian elite, including military and business interests. So it's not to say that the judiciary was kind of under attack. I mean, certainly there is an element of that, but the judiciary was very much a part of this story from the beginning. And I think the change we're seeing now is because all of this information is coming to light, right? You have the lead prosecutor on Operation Car Wash, who said that being able to jail Lula was a gift from the CIA. And you've had the U.S. Department of Justice boasting about their collaboration. They called it a success story. Even the head of the person who's now the head of the FBI's International Corruption Unit bragged that they had toppled Brazilian presidents. And so, this is playing very poorly in Brazil, which is a country that very much values its sovereignty, and they're very proud of the fact that they're sovereign. And now what they're seeing is that they've been completely sold out by their elites to the United States and to U.S. interests. And then I think the elites are fearing a backlash. And so that's why the case is annulled. And it's interesting, the case is actually annulled because of a jurisdictional issue and not because of all this evidence that's come to light. And so really it seems to me that what the judiciary here is trying to do is they're trying to move past this as quickly and quietly as they can because they don't want any more blowback from this case. But that said, I mean, everything you described, it points to the fact that, Lula is a big threat to the establishment and to oligarchs in Brazil. And they're really going to do whatever they can to try to sabotage his election, or if he's not the candidate, the Workers' Party in 2022, the presidential election. And that all really.
Well, right there, like you said, he's a huge threat, and they were willing to go so far as to put the man in prison in order to stop. I mean, elaborate efforts to put him in prison. And we were talking about like some of the other left-wing governments. I mean, Evo Morales being taken out in Honduras with the OAS. And then you find out that there's all of these ties with the U.S. In that coup. And so you see something, like Lula getting put in prison, and you think to yourself, well, does the U.S. have involvement? And then you see the leaks that Greenwald put out. You even hear their own quotes. And it becomes very clear, yes, clearly we did. Meaning there's influence from the U.S. in regards to left-wing governments in South America. And it's something, whether it's in Venezuela, whether it's in Honduras, whether it's in Bolivia, or for that matter, whether it's in Brazil. What is that going to look like this time around? Think about what I'm saying. With all of the people that were leveled and lined up in order to stop Lula that last time, what does this look like going forward? Or is Lula on some level bulletproof because of all of the information that was exposed showing that all of this malfeasance and getting him out of the political space the first time around, meaning they can't touch him because of everything that was revealed prior?
No, I certainly think they're going to attempt to touch him. Whether or not they'll be successful is an open question. What we're seeing right now in Latin America is almost a resurgence of the pink tide, which was this era in the early 2000s. And you had progressive government after progressive government winning power in Latin America. And the U.S. really responded to that by attempting to break down the movement towards regional integration that was growing in Latin America. And Brazil became a target, not just because of regional integration within South America, say, for example, organizations like UNASUR, the Union of South American Nations, which was very powerful until the right wing started taking power thanks to the U.S., and then it fell apart. But Brazil was also very importantly part of BRICS, this system that was this group of countries that were meant to serve as a counterweight to the U.S. and the EU and NATO. And so by being able to take Brazil and basically neutralize or nullify BRICS, that was a key geopolitical victory for the U.S. And now they're afraid that Lula's going to bring back this push towards regionalism, just like they have done in Bolivia, just like they'll do in Ecuador if Andrés Arauz, the leading candidate, wins there in about a month. So, I mean, I think in that context, we have to see it as the left kind of resurging in Latin America, and the U.S. is going to try to do everything it can to stop that.
And we've only got about 30 seconds left for this, but I want to turn to you real quick on it, Leo. With the evidence of the CIA involved in the plot to, fabricate these charges against Lula, with their aiding and abetting that process, how do you think Lula is going to respond if he becomes the president? How do you think he will treat the U.S.? How would this change, the foreign policy, the relationship between Brazil and the United States simply?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think Lula understands that the relationship is going to be very complicated. There's too many business interests to really just break relations off altogether. But I think Lula needs to be very aware of who his enemies are. And so he's going to push for regional integration because that's the only way that South America can really defend itself from U.S. hegemony and empire is through unity.
Leo, thank you so much for that. Thank you for joining us too. Really appreciate you taking the time this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. For those listening, that was the voice of Leo Flores. He's a political analyst and the Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. You can follow Leo on Twitter at LeonardoEFA, as well as on the Code Pink website. That's codepink.org. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a short break right now at the end of the hour, but we will be back in a minute with headlines and the last hour of today's show. See you then.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, events, and more across our country and across our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, I hope everybody's morning continues to go well. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, at least 1,885 new coronavirus deaths and 56,507 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 58,877 cases per day. That is a decrease of 13% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 29,189,000 people in the United States have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 527,000 have died from it. A quick note on this, with more than 30 million Americans having received double vaccinations, full vaccinations basically, we have at some point in the recent past crossed the line at which more people have been vaccinated against COVID than have reportedly got COVID in the United States. Just throwing that quick commentary in. Hard to tell exactly when that happened, but there you go. China has issued the world's first COVID-19 vaccine passport, which shows a user's vaccination status, recent coronavirus test results, and antibody test results. The vaccine health certificates were launched on Monday for Chinese citizens to download on social media platform WeChat. The certificate is also available in paper form. It is not yet mandatory. So far, only 3.65% of China's population has been vaccinated. It is unclear which countries will recognize the passport. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said on Monday that President Joe Biden's administration was monitoring alleged disinformation efforts tied to Russia's intelligence services undermining the Moderna and Pfizer coronavirus vaccines. Jamarl, you mentioned you saw Manila tweeting about this. Interesting stuff. We should try to get her on soon to talk about this because it's silly to me. But hey, anyway, moving on.
It is silly.
Poland has reported its highest number. Yes. Poland has reported its highest number of new coronavirus cases in months, with over 17,000 new infections and over 400 virus-related deaths in a country of under 40 million. And you know what? I'm going to go back to the last one for just a second. I say it's silly. I guess this is the same for me as it's laughable. It's not silly though. They're continuing to use this narrative of Russian disinformation, which itself is disinformation. And they're doing it in a way that's not just bad for Americans because it throws them off of what's actually happening here, which is a lot of people just don't trust vaccines, or they're slow to trust vaccines. Two different ways to look at it, and I'm sure each of those would affect different groups in America. But it's also really bad because it sets us up for more conflict with another nation internationally, and it does so for no good end, as far as I can tell, other than continuing to enrich the military-industrial complex contractors who are benefiting off of the massive military expenditures we're engaged in, with the whole idea that other countries, namely Russia and China, and you can throw in Iran in there too, I guess, the whole idea that they're these significant threats to us and that they would be chomping at the bits of our borders if we were to reduce those military expenditures, which again, ridiculous. It's silly because it's laughable, but it's not silly because it's deadly serious at the same time. In national political news, the state of Florida is suing President Joe Biden's administration over new directives that have halted detentions of some immigrants who have served time in prison. The complaint filed by Florida argues the new ICE guidelines violate commands of Congress by limiting immigration enforcement to terrorists, spies, aggravated felons, certain gang members, and those who recently crossed the border illegally. Florida's complaint follows a similar action filed by Arizona last month that Montana joined on Tuesday. That lawsuit was originally filed to stop a 100-day moratorium on deportations. The moratorium was blocked by a federal judge in Texas. Former U.S. President Donald Trump issued a written statement commenting on an immigration surge at the U.S.-Mexico border. In that statement, it read, quote, "When I was a president, our southern border was in great shape, stronger, safer, and more secure than ever before." We ended catch and release, shut down asylum fraud, and crippled the vicious smugglers, drug dealers, and human traffickers, end quote. Trump slammed Biden's decision to stop construction of a U.S.-Mexico border wall that was, quote unquote, working magnificently, and he claimed that the U.S. is, quote, being destroyed at the southern border, end quote. President Joe Biden will join the first ever meeting of the leaders of Japan, India, and Australia on Friday. Known as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, representatives for the four member nations have met periodically since its establishment in 2007. Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison will all participate in the summit. An investigation into the death of Kendrick Johnson, the Georgia teenager found dead in a rolled-up gym mat 8 years ago, has been reopened, according to Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Pock. Johnson, 17, was found upside down in the mat in Lowndes County High School in January 2013. Local investigators initially ruled his death was an accident, but Johnson's parents have said they think their son was killed. An autopsy conducted by a pathologist hired by Johnson's family determined that the cause of death was, quote, unexplained, apparent, non-accidental blunt force trauma, end quote, to the neck. The investigation could take up to 6 months. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has approved a request to extend the presence of National Guard troops at the Capitol grounds for an additional 2 months, according to the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby. Kirby said nearly 2,300 National Guard troops will continue their deployment in the nation's capital. And I don't even want to revisit. I just want to try to briefly summarize. Jamarl and I are up in arms at each other about this one, and to the mildest degree that I can use that phrase. I am opposed to the continued deployment of troops, or at least I think they should be significantly reduced, and you should pull the barbed wire barricades down. It's not a good look for our country. And Jamarl, I believe that you think it's more justified because after all, on January 6th, you did have a violent breach of the Capitol.
Yeah.
And politicians are worried for their lives.
I don't care how it looks. I mean, this is kind of like, we're going to talk about this, unfortunately, but I feel like, I'm totally strawmanning you on this, so I take it. I'm totally strawmanning. I'm being hyperbolic. But this puts me in the mind of the Meghan interview, the Meghan Duchess of Sussex, or whatever they call her, where she's in the royal family. She's like, this is too much. This is too heavy for me. I'm not used to this. I feel like I'm going to kill myself. And they're like, the optics of this look bad, so we can't have you do that. We can't get you help because the optics look bad. I don't care about the optics. Like, there are things that matter at somewhat of a deeper level that need to be addressed, that go beyond just the theatrics or how it looks. And, whether the Capitol is one of those things, I kind of think it is. We can come to difference of agreements in regards to that. And my amount, maybe 2,000, is too imposing. And maybe trying to do it in a way that doesn't necessarily come across as this kind of aggressive, gruff look. And we could come to some kind of terms on that. But no, I don't think anything is wrong with it. I don't care about the optics. This is one of those things where I care about the reality of it. I don't think that's a total straw man. I mean, there's a reality to it. And even the attack where they were saying, look, we need to put out troops, and it was like, whoa, that looks bad. Even at the Capitol, that was said. What's his name's brother, basically, was in on that. God, I can't think of his name today, right now. It'll come to me in a moment. But one of Flynn's brother was in on that. And so it's like, do we always care about the optics? Or are they things that go deeper than just the look of it? In the suicide case, yeah, I think it went deeper. In the case of the Capitol, I also think it goes deeper. Is that a straw man? I'm trying to think of whether that's a straw man, and I'm not entirely sold on whether I think it is or not. But you're going to make an argument, and I'm going to either agree with it or disagree with it. So go for it.
Logical fallacy specific. Oh yeah, your audio got cut for a second. We don't need to get too deep into the logical fallacy, specification, whatever the case may be. I mean, man, it's sure. Okay, so optics is one way to put it. I said that doesn't look good, but it also doesn't feel good, and I don't think it is good for America to be in a state of high alert where in the capital area, you're effectively still living in martial law with, thousands of troops on the ground and barbed wire strung up around the perimeter. Usually, I remember, living in D.C., you can just walk around the area. You can hang out. You can, enter congressional hearings yourself and hear them having those conversations, hear the deliberations, and it's weirdly, eerily quiet in the middle of the night, as it would be, even though often, these debates go on through the middle of the night, well into the night. But the point is, it's open, and that is deeply representative in American democracy of the idea that we are a representative government, that these officials are representing our interests, and that you should have purview, you should have access, you should be able to go in and, not disrupt the proceedings, but be a part of them. Those are shoulds. But
I know, but reality doesn't care about shoulds. And even though I agree with you with the idea of representative, open democracy and everything else, do you believe you're being represented right now by the way that they're engaging in Congress? And if you don't believe you're represented, go ahead.
You say that shoulds don't matter.
No, I'm saying reality doesn't care about shoulds.
Well, okay, so that it seems like it's the same thing to me, effectively.
Well,
reality doesn't care about my shoulds. Human beings respond universally to shoulds. Our whole political system is constructed on shoulds. Shoulds do matter. Shoulds
I know, Shane, but I'm talking about reality, meaning how things are currently. I'm not talking about how you feel about it. How you feel about it, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry. And the shoulds are always going to be contained. The shoulds are always going to be subject to reality. Always. And meaning, I want to fly. Well, I don't have wings. I can't fly. I'm going to have to find some way around that. Can I mitigate it? Yes. But can I do it at some point?
That's
Yeah.
a straw man.
Well, that's not a straw man. I'm making the point that there are all sorts of things that you may want to do. And there are all sorts of things that you may think should be. Reality is different. And you have to deal with reality the way reality is. They just had an attempt on the Capitol where people were going through with a noose looking for Mike Pence. And that's been, 2 months ago. I don't necessarily think it's insane for members of Congress to feel some kind of way about it. How you feel about that, looking at it, is one thing. How they feel about it is just as valid, especially since they're the ones that were under threat. So I get how you want it to be. I get how it, quote unquote, should be. I don't even know if shoulds exist in this context.
Jamarl, are you saying that we are equal players in the political process as politicians? Are you saying that we're on the same ground? You said that how you feel about it matters just as much as how they feel about it. That is not, because here's the thing. Are you saying that?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you feel about it a particular way. Fair enough. You can feel however you feel. There are 300 million Americans. I'm talking about the members that are in Congress that were there, meaning the people like Pence, who was in Congress where the people were looking for him with a noose, have a certain purview and opinion. I think their opinion matters just as much, if not more, than yours in this very specific case. I mean, I do. They were the ones that were under threat.
That's the case. Can't this be used to justify? Can't this be used to go? When is too long? You say 2 months. That's actually a fair bit of time, and it's going to be extended for another 2 months.
That's a fair bit of time to you. That's a fair bit of time to you. That's a fair bit of time to you. What's your standard?
Let's stop this.
What's your scale? What scale that you're using to say that's a fair bit of time, Shane? You're putting these standards up.
Here's the thing. I am, because nobody else seems to be. Are you? Are they? When is this going to end? What does this mean for American democracy that it seems like we have in perpetuity guards up around the halls of Congress?
It's been 2 months.
What is that going to do to our sense of our country?
It's been 2 months. It's not in perpetuity. It's been 2 months.
2 months now.
It's been 2 months, Shane.
It's another 2 months, and they're talking about making it permanent.
Well, that's not there yet, and it hasn't been made permanent yet. And when it's been made permanent, we can have this conversation. But right now, you're talking about something that's been 2 months, and you're acting as if it's been gotten like a decade or something. It hasn't been. It's been 2 months.
All right. Well, they just set it up. They just set it up for another 2 months. It'll be 4 months, and they're talking about making it in perpetuity. Where are the standards? You asked me. Okay, this is my standard. Well, there need to be standards somewhere. I don't hear them talking about standards. I don't hear you talking about standards. Where are the standards? When should they come home? When should we make it so that we live in a slightly more functional democracy again? I'm not even asking for an actual democracy. But martial law in the capital area. When is that? We got to get back to.
I don't know. But I don't think those things are. You're acting as if this is flat fact reality as opposed to subjective commentary. At the end of the day, no, I don't want it to be in perpetuity. I don't.
But what do you want me to say, Jamarl? Okay.
I'm just saying, I don't want.
You want me to disqualify every one of my opinions by saying, you know what, this is just what I think. Reality
No,
is
Shane.
reality.
Nobody
we don't have
is.
any ability to voice an opinion on what exists. We're just talking. Our words are just noise. It doesn't matter. We should just shut up.
Straw man much? Yeah, talk about straw man much. Straw man much.
I know.
Talk about severe straw man much. I'm being very specific when I talk about that stuff, and I'm being very straight to you about it. I asked you a question yesterday. It was like, Shane, I asked you, what do you think? Not what 5 different other opinions are. And you went into this whole thing about opinions and perspectives, and you were all this stuff. So, yeah, I'm not going to take a lesson from you on this nonsense. You asked me a straight question. I gave you a straight answer. I don't think 2 months is too long. And I think these fake standards of, well, I think this 2 months is too long and another 2 months is too long. Well, if they gets in perpetuity, I would agree with you. But right now, it's 2 months.
Okay.
Somebody tried to hang Mike Pitts. So
all right.
That's where I'm at.
All right, man. We got to close it out. We're out of time for headlines. Fun conversation. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute with our next guest, Glory Jones, talking about an upcoming Assange event in D.C. Be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and the faults and the lines are coming out in this show. It's a fun conversation, Jamarl. You know, we both enjoy this stuff. We're moving on though. We're talking to our next guest, Glory Jones, about Assange, specifically about an event that they have coming up. Glory Jones and Misty Winston and others are organizing in D.C. We're going to be getting into the specifics of that, but it's also a completely valid opportunity to revisit the unjust detainment and continued political persecution of one of the world's best journalists, frankly, Julian Assange. Again, we're joined now by Glory Jones. For those listening, she's a political activist, organizer, and one of the co-hosts of the Slow News Day podcast. As an on-the-ground activist, she fights for causes such as Julian Assange and the free press, Black liberation, anti-imperialism, and anti-national security state actions. You can follow Glory's work on Twitter. Check her out. Check the podcast she's a part about, Slow News Day Show. Go check that out on Twitter. Glory, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me to help spread word about this event.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with the event, and then we can talk Assange news more generally. When is this? Where is it? And how can people find more about it? Glory.
Yes, so March 17th and March 18th, basically. March 17th is St. Patrick's Day, and about a year ago, one of the organizers from Anonymous came up with the four-leaved clover as a way for Assange supporters to be able to recognize and identify each other online and show support and solidarity for Julian Assange, and also just because the clover typically symbolizes luck, and we were at a point where he really needed some luck in his case. So people started adding the clovers to their name as a way to recognize each other, and it really took off, and we spawned the Clovers for Assange hashtag. So basically what we're trying to do is, for this St. Patrick's Day, we're trying to take that theme into the real world, and it's going to be part of an entire international day of action for Julian Assange around the Clovers theme. Just especially important given that April 11th will be the 2-year anniversary of him being dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy and into Belmarsh. So March 17th, we'll pretty much be holding Action for Assange is pretty much organizing peaceful protests in Washington, D.C. Everybody is welcome to come and join us and make some noise. We'll be marching around mainstream media outlets, Fox News, and then we'll be ending at CNN. And then actually we'll be joining up with another protest, the F censorship protest, organized by the Convo Couch to help really raise awareness of the vast demonetization of channels and censorship that's happening from big tech. So we'll be joining them for their F censorship protest. And then that'll be the day of the 17th. And then on the 18th, Action for Assange will be back at the Department of Justice, which is continuing to appeal the decision of no extradition that the judge denied, and we'll be protesting that as well, essentially. And yeah, we really hope everyone can make it out and make this a kind of a huge and really absurd event as well, just because one of the things that we're trying to recognize is that we're in a completely absurd situation where Julian is essentially freezing in Belmarsh prison for no reason at this point, other than the fact that the Empire wants him tortured and dead. So, and obviously the prosecution is a complete clown show. They've been defeated legally at multiple points by the witnesses and by the defense team of Julian Assange. So taking the whole absurdity of that situation, including the fact that he's been spied by Spanish firm UC Global, that situation demands equal, if not more, levels of absurdity from us, from activists, to try and gain support and to try and really draw attention to this issue. So from that perspective, we really want to make this a big event, and it's going to be big because it's already an International Day of Action. There's also events going on in Boston, in Mexico City, in Amsterdam. Some of the organizers for Anonymous are organizing in Amsterdam. There might be something in London, even though they have some really draconian protest measures right now. And New Zealand as well, Germany, really all over the world, as it's an International Day of Action for Clovers for Assange.
Gloria Jones, thank you for joining us. And first, greatest name ever. I love that name. I was telling Shane, it put me in mind of Grace Jones, and it's like the idea of grace or glory. Both of those things kind of have this kind of emancipatory quality to the name. Love it. Absolutely love the name. Also love what you guys are doing. Also love what you guys are doing. The Assange thing has been a big deal, and we've been following this for years. March 17th, wow. It's April 11th. It's that short of a time, or that long of a time, depending upon where you are. What do you guys want out of this from the standpoint of the protests? What is the objective? Like, what if you could leave that protest on that day, at the end of that day, what would happen where you said this was a success? We got what we were trying to do out of this very specific instance. What would that thing be?
The biggest thing we could get out of these actions is more attention to the issue, just because there's a massive media blackout from really mainstream and even most independent media taking place on this issue. We want more attention to the issue, and we want just more eyes on it. And also, we want to be able to kind of recruit people to the movement. We want people to be able to see it, and then let these events all over the world be a catalyst for more people to get involved. Because, like I mentioned earlier, April 11th is going to be the 2-year anniversary of Julian being dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy and thrown into Belmarsh prison. So he'll be tortured in solitary confinement, now freezing, for no reason, essentially, besides the fact that the Empire wants him dead, obviously, for 2 years, April 11th. So we really, really need to garner mass public support and pressure just every single facet of the state right now to release Julian Assange and drop the charges and ensure that he gets the care that he needs, because we can't really rely on politicians to make this happen if we don't have a mass campaign to pressure them at this point. They've been spineless up until now. So unless we literally force them to do it with a mass public pressure campaign, something like to the levels of something like the one that got Mandela freed, then we can't really think that Julian Assange will be freed, because at the point where he is in his case, the prosecution can continue to file appeal after appeal after appeal and just drag out the case, because that's the point where we are. They're hoping that he just slowly dies in prison, because even if the appeals continue to get defeated in court, he'll remain there because Vanessa Baraitser initially denied bail, and because the judges feel that because he received an asylum offer from AMLO in Mexico, that he's a flight risk. So he'll keep remaining in Belmarsh throughout these constant appeals process. So at this point, if we don't have a massive pressure campaign to just have him released and have the charges dropped, then he'll probably remain in Belmarsh forever.
I think
like you're saying, the appeals process could go on for a very, very long time. One thing that could throw a slight spanner into the works here, I want to come back to Julian Assange's mental or physical health. Some people have talked about how Merrick Garland, Biden's incoming AG, how he might change things up. He might go against Biden. He's been the opinion that some people have voiced about Garland is that he is a free speech advocate, a First Amendment activist, First Amendment advocate in the United States, and that therefore he might be more likely. I'm doubtful, but still, this goes to the point. This process has been dragged on for far too many years at this point, and it shows all the signs of being dragged on into perpetuity by the United States. It seems like the British government, if they wanted to, whether it's giving Assange the ability to get bail, even if he is a flight risk, or simply accelerating the appeal process so they can sort of summarily go through the appeals that the United States would launch in quick sequence and give Assange a path to freedom. It seems like they could go through that process. And to that point, last we heard, Assange was not in a good position. I mean, literally, obviously, in Belmarsh, but psychologically, physically, he's not doing well. What's the latest we've heard on Assange, Glory?
Yeah, well, it's always hard to talk about his health, but ultimately it was talking about that which led to extradition being denied, because Vanessa Baraitser at the time, she denied extradition on the grounds that he would commit suicide if he had to face the draconian conditions of the U.S. prison system. So basically, he is at a suicide risk as it stands. He's very depressed, very weak. He has a chronic lung condition, which leaves him particularly susceptible to COVID. And to make all matters worse, this entire winter he's been freezing in Belmarsh. He was sent warm clothes by his family, obviously, but the prisons essentially kept the clothes in storage throughout all of the London winter. So basically, a lot of activists and myself were hoping we contacted Belmarsh Prison constantly and daily in hopes that he could just get his warm clothes. And what they did was they sent all of us the same exact email about how they're still holding prison clothes. We must be mistaken. It was a standard politician-like email, really, and it was absolutely disgusting. And they're essentially going to be holding his warm clothes even further throughout the rest of this winter and spring, and he probably won't even access them until he doesn't need them anymore. So he was forced to layer up and put books against his window, insulate himself with those just to keep himself warm. It's wonderful how he's really pulling through all of this and still pushing through it all, and his family as well being able to take all this. But yeah, that's kind of the latest on his conditions.
That's unfortunate. And I got to be honest, I don't think that the role of it is for him to die. I think the role of it is for him to suffer, and to do so in public, and to do so where people could see him doing it. And, I do think it's emblematic, almost this kind of experiential irony, that the guy who's being tortured like this is being tortured because he told the truth. Isn't that astonishing? Publishing truth to the world is one of the things that will get you put in prison. That is astonishing. Glory Jones, I want to thank you for joining us to have this conversation. Glory Jones is, there we are. Gloria Jones is a political activist, organizer, and one of the co-hosts of the Slow News Day podcast. As an on-the-ground activist, she fights for causes such as Julian Assange, free press, black liberation, anti-imperialism, and anti-national security state actions. You can follow Gloria Jones's work on Twitter at drglory958 and at Slow News Day show. And Glory, please come back and give us a heads up on that. In fact, I'm almost inclined to say if you're going to be on the ground, give us a report while you're on the ground. I'm not going to put that on you right here. We can talk after the fact, but thank you for joining us. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're coming up with a conversation that everybody has been asking about, everybody has been clamoring about. We've been somewhat avoiding it, but we've been dragged into the gravity of it. We're going to have a conversation on the Royals. I know all of you wanted it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We had a conversation yesterday about the Royals, meaning Shane and I. And what we kind of both came to the conclusion is that we didn't necessarily want to talk about the story, but the story was so big and ubiquitous that not talking about it was almost more conspicuous and problematic than talking about it. So let's have a conversation about the Royals, and let's have a conversation about this very specific issue with Meghan. This interview with Oprah Winfrey is probably going to go down as one of the largest interviews in the history of The Crown. And not just The Crown, even more so, probably more significant than Diana, Princess Diana. It's wild, it's explosive, it hits upon things of issues of race, of class, and even of issues of mental health. I mean, this has been a conversation that's been taking place for the last several days now. In this interview, Meghan was very honest. I mean, she made the point saying, you know, there was concern about the kid's skin color, that while she was in the royal family, she had these issues with suicidal thoughts, and that she was told that she couldn't necessarily really bring that up or do anything about that because it would reflect poorly on the crown and the institution. Even this notion about the kid not getting a title. And her thought was, well, wait a minute, why shouldn't my kid get a title? And is it even safe if my kid doesn't get a title? Yeah, this interview was pretty explosive. I mean, the Queen had to comment basically saying that they were saddened by the whole affair. And Piers Morgan ends up storming off the set after basically saying that he didn't believe that she was having these suicidal thoughts. All sorts of complaints was filed against him over that particular issue, and an investigation had been opened because it breaches certain guidelines about things or problematic behavior that may have negative consequences going forward. So, MariTi is our new producer. I'm going to bring you in, and we're going to bring Shane in to get your take on this. I don't like talking about the Royals because, to me, it is 2021, and we're pretending as if these people are appointed by God. They're human beings. If like, can I just be king of Aquaman? Because Thor basically said that I was going to be, king of Atlantis. And can I just run with that title from here on out? And I demand people call me by that title. And is it really the only distinction, the number of people who can play around in this particular imaginary game? I mean, it's nonsense. We're still pretending that people are appointed by God in the year of 2021. And yet, there they are. And there's all sorts of reasons why they try to keep the royalty in place and everything else. And I know it's a fixture. Fair enough. But when things like this come up, I try to ignore it for that very specific reason, because I don't want to give legitimacy to the idea that these guys were appointed by some supernatural being. However, here we are. And at this point, we're just talking about issues of race and class. MariTi, what are your thoughts? I would imagine you got dragged into this too. So how are you viewing all of this?
But honestly, I'm in the same boat as you, because growing up where I grew up, we never really talked about the royal family. They weren't a big deal for us. But what became a big deal was when Meghan jumped in, because she's a Black woman. So now we got to kind of pay attention. But even with this whole interview and everything that went down, I honestly feel like that they at this point, they're just using it as a distraction. For the fact that they want to say that this is going to be bigger than Diana, it's like, how are you going to say this is a bigger problem than Princess Diana with everything that went down with her? It seems like the royal family is honestly using this whole idea with Meghan kind of as a distraction from the real conversations that they need to have. Like, let's talk about Prince Andrew, for example. But that's a whole different story. I think in this situation, let's just go to what Meghan brought up. Like with mental health.
Interesting. Wait. Interesting. You think that they're... Wow. So I do think they have problems with Andrews. Agreed. 1,000% agree. Mm-hmm. But I think the issue with this is the race thing. Like, for the first time, the royal family, who has all of these colonies, who laid a path of viciousness throughout Africa, and what my wife and I were visiting Kenya last year, and we could see how bad Kenya was under British rule, the stuff that they were doing, forcing them for coffee and all this stuff, insane stuff.
Exactly.
And so you can see it.
That's not a race issue anymore. That's not a race issue.
Well, the moment that
when you go back and look at slavery and all that stuff, it wasn't a race issue. It was all about the money.
It was class, but it became race.
Now, I don't think it has anything to do with her race. They saying it does, but they just trying to use that as an excuse.
Oh, I disagree with you on this. I'm glad you said that, because I disagree with you on this. We got to bring Shane into this. No, I think they had real concerns about how dark that baby's skin color was going to be. And I would wager to you that in mixed families all across the United States, that conversation takes place. I don't think that conversation was weird at all. I think that conversation was more normal than not. What are your thoughts, Shane? You think I'm wrong on this, or you think MariTi is right on this?
I mean, I don't, MariTi, I heard you saying something, so I want to go back to you real quick here, but just to add something in here. Yes, Prince Andrew, especially with Epstein, we're talking about on this issue in an interesting way. This has more play in the U.S. Not only the fact that Oprah was doing the interview, obviously from the U.S., but also I just would argue race is a bit more contentious in the U.S. than it is in basically any other country, including the U.K. And so in a weird way, this is like another cross the pond press event that is predominating in both British and American media. But MariTi, I heard you saying something there. What were you going to say?
I was just saying, if you look at it, because we want to say they were going to argue about how dark the baby's skin was. You want to go back to slavery. Let's look at all of the British leaders that we had in the past, and they had some Black babies. So it's I don't think that's the biggest issue that the Crown family has to worry about.
But they weren't in the Crown. They weren't in the royal family. They weren't in the royal family. Nobody had to worry about a nappy-head kid running through the palace. Nobody worried about that. They're worried about that now.
Because that's who was cleaning the palace. What you mean they ain't have to worry about that? They ain't have to worry about him wearing the crown, but he was going to wear it anyway. And I'm just saying, Prince Harry already checked out of the royal family, so that's not even an issue that they got to worry about at this point.
He might have checked out, but he's still part of the royal family. Can you check out the royal family? If you're appointed by God, can you check out of God's appointment? I don't think you can, MariTi.
I mean, if you don't answer the call, then
Well, I mean, this is just the Crown's continued degradation, which frankly, good. About damn time it continues to degrade, because I think we're all on the same page. These are centuries old policies we're talking about. This whole thing should go kaput anyway. I don't mean to be too denigratory towards, if you're a British citizen, you have your perspectives. It's not my business on the one hand. On the other hand, we're talking about monarchy here. I thought we'd moved past that at least a couple centuries ago. Apparently not. I'm going to take this opportunity. I am the Duke of this show. I am the Duke of fault lines. That is where I stand. Jamarl, I'm sorry about that, man. You can plant your flag in the ground, but my position is clear anyway.
Oh, that is hilarious. Yeah, I mean, look, we won the war, right? We won that war. Yeah, we didn't have the king, and we didn't have that influence like that. So we have a very different perspective on that. But from the thing of race, yeah, I agree with you, Shane and Marie. Yeah, I think that this is where this plays in America. And I think when this woman is American, she's mixed race. She goes into the royal family, like you say, MariTi, that this all of a sudden is like, whoa, there's a mixed woman in the royal family. And that mixed woman who's in a royal family, well, that royal family might not be on the same page. I mean, I know you said that they might have had these black babies, but like I said, these black babies weren't in the palace. They weren't part of the family. They weren't potentially getting a title. That stuff wasn't taking place. That stuff could potentially take place now. And those royal family members had to get their mind right. Harry, who seems to be kind of on the outskirts and not, like you said, less inclined of the palace life, well, he's still part of the family. And everything that he does from that context, especially who he marries, matters. And I don't know. I am not shocked, let me just say it that way, that the British family and that some of those family members weren't on board. I'm not shocked. And look, I'm saying this. We have my cousin, my cousin. His dad one time, my cousin gets a white woman pregnant. And my uncle, one time he was wasted, he was drunk, he says, that boy went and desegregated the family. Now, was he racist? No. Did he have concerns about that baby's race? Yes. Yes. And that's from the black side. My dad, for God's sake, one of my, I have half brothers, even though I barely know him. Oh man, because we weren't ever associated with one another. But I do know that he got a white woman pregnant. And same thing. My dad was like, one day he was like, look, I'm not against it. I'm just saying those babies have a hard life and blah, 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 blah. So if they think that way, why wouldn't I be shocked that the royal family, who all of these years of slavery and colonialism and everything else, and looking at it from a British perspective, you think the American perspective is something. What is the British perspective? Lifting up the world, holding the world up. If it wasn't for the Brits, the white man's burden, that type of stuff. How did they view the world? I hope you get my point. And now all of a sudden, this kid is in the family. And she's making the point of saying they weren't on board. And I was having difficulties. And Oprah, best person in the world to pluck that stuff out. And Oprah loves it. Can you imagine what's in Oprah's head? She's like, tell us more. Tell us more. Who said it? Oh my God. And then Oprah gives the facial expressions and everything else just to make it work that much better. Oh, she's the best person for this interview. I can't think of anybody else who could have done an interview to get this much fan play, to get this much, where she could put out this kind of empathetic, tell me more. Oh gosh, did they really say that? And I often wonder, what is in Oprah's head as she's doing these interviews? What are your thoughts? I mean, tell me. I mean, Shane,
I like you're playing into it, man. I'll be honest. I feel like you're playing into it. We brought this segment up. We did this because we felt like it was, like you were saying, it would be conspicuous if we didn't cover it. It would be weird. And in some sense, we're just a morning news show network. We try to cover the news, and this is like the world's biggest news item right now, regretfully. But I don't care about what's in Oprah's head. I don't care about what's in Meghan Markle's head. I don't care about what's in any of their heads. I think it's ridiculous. I think the whole thing is ridiculous. And we're talking about it, but mostly what I want to focus on when I'm talking about it is how ridiculous that practically everybody else is spending most of their time talking about it. I think you know where I am. What's your take, MariTi?
I mean, I feel like I'm the same way. I'd rather, it's not a conversation that I really can have because, like you said, when you brought it up, what is going through the British family's head as far as having a black baby in the family? I can only imagine that's going through their head is that they're going to have to start changing some pictures around up in there and showing what a true king is supposed to look like. But when it comes to an American perspective, and when you brought up your father and how he reacted to having a white baby in a family, it's usually the other way around with black families. It's like the darker the baby, the harder time they're going to get. And so it's like once you bring a white woman to the mix, and that's like, oh, that light just skinned baby's gonna have a bit of an easier time. And that's why I'm like, Megan, I get it. I'm not like pushing back what she was saying as far as like with them challenging her and like how she felt about it. But she really, if I walked in and I said I'm a part of the royal family now, I would have got a harder time, and Oprah wouldn't interview me about it. That's all I gotta say.
You don't think so? I think Oprah would have interviewed you about it. I think Oprah would have been entirely interested in that story. Because it's so look, the thing of race is complicated, especially for mixed kids. And I'm saying this like we have my wife's niece is mixed, and just seeing her grow up on some level, and you can see like the weird like emotional stuff or the weird complications associated with it, and trying to identify who you are and what you are in a society that has kind of these weirdly clear terms in regards to race. So I'm not going to take a shot at her on that part. And look, and you're right, Shane. This story, we avoided the story like the plague. And I got to be honest, I didn't even look the story up until today because I was that disinterested in this story. By the same token, I am always interested in what's going on in people's head, like in general. And so seeing Oprah do this interview and seeing this stuff take place, it's interesting in a way of watching, Vanderpump Rules is interesting, if that makes sense. That's another show I got stuck into, this kind of trash TV. But look, it's the Royals. We have an opinion on it. Our opinion on it is that this should not be one of the key stories. But if you're living in the UK and if you're living in the US, yeah, on some level, on a tabloid level, I guess it's interesting. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and of course our producer MariTi. Thank you, MariTi, I should say. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with the wrap.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're taking your calls. We're in the wrap segment. That's the closing segment for today's show, wrapping everything up. If you want to call in, now's the chance, 202-521-1320. We've got calls and we're taking more. Let's go to Tarif from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on. What's on your mind?
I have two comments. Before I get to the two comments, don't forget how the royalty in Britain made their money and the Lords of London made their money off the East India Company, off the tears of the Indians, and also off the slave trade and the cotton trade, dealing with buying opium to drug the Chinese. So that's how they made their money, off the taxes. It was taxes, the Lords of London and stuff like that.
100%. 100. I just want to briefly comment. 100%. Very good thing to bring up. Yeah, a history of war crimes before war crimes were a codified thing. But 100% agreed there. Anyway, Tarif.
Yeah. Okay. Go to my other two comments. First comment dealing with the had a guy named Jeffrey Burnett Bennett had 14 points of what makes a country a superpower. I'm only going to go over 4 of them. Conduct the most advanced technical research, controls leading edge of communication. United States basically lost that, to be honest with you. Dominates aerospace and the military weapons industry. Next 5 to 10 years, we're gonna be second or third. Because China gonna overtake that too, just like to overtake the other things. Because we're not investing into our youth. We don't have no trades programs, no engineering programs. Looking for the best of the best. China doing it. They're looking for the best of the population. Once they spot a kid that's a genius, they bring him through the ranks. So Russia. I think Russia do the same thing. I think India might be doing the same thing, but not the United States. And my last comment, free Julian Assange, of course. WikiLeaks tweeted out something that it seemed like Banksy had a portrait on a wall, and it seemed to be Julian Assange.
An actual
scaling down it.
problem.
Right? It looked like they're bringing attention to Julian Assange, which is a good thing. You know, some other people were saying there's another person from the 1800s, but it kind of like Julian Assange. And, yeah, that's pretty good. And the more attention we can bring to this man and free him, the better. If you don't win a Nobel Peace Prize, we can make our own one. I donate to it, you know, and keep on moving forward. And it's all
Tarif.
It's safe. Yeah.
Agreed. Tarif, thank you for the call. I'm just looking at the Banksy, the portrait you got up. I mean, not you got up there, but WikiLeaks reposted this. It's a great, Banksy's good. But it's a dude scaling down a wall, wearing prison garb, scaling down a wall. Basically, it looks like a rope, and then until you get to the bottom, it's paper coming out of a typewriter. So interesting sort of double entendre. Julian, obviously a press figure, but it's also the way he gets out of prison is with more coverage of this. Just
oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah, that's an interesting metaphor. Yeah, I like that.
It is.
I like that.
It's good. Yeah, Tarif, thank you for the call. We got more calls. 202-521-1320.
Real quick, before we get
from Atlanta.
Well, real quick, before we get to Brave, and Brave, I promise we'll get to you like one moment. The why? Why doesn't the U.S. do that? Like, is it just one of those things where if you're behind, you're more focused? Is that it? Like where, like, you know, like a weary champion. You know, it's a unipolar world where we've won, and there's nothing really to win because the world just kind of keep going on in perpetuity, basically missing the ball where the other countries are like, we have to catch up, we have to catch up. And because there's such a dedicated focus to the catching up, that it's more, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a certain degree of expertise that's dedicated to it? I'm not sure. I'm Brave, I'm sorry. What's going on, man?
Yeah, I've got plenty of opinions on that, but not enough time. Let's just go to calls. Brave, you're on the line. What's going on, man?
Hey, good morning. Getting back to your conversation the other day, because I got a lot of build up. Getting back to the conversation the other day on the protests and success since what time period or whatever the case, the conversation you guys were basically having. I actually think you guys were both making great points. You guys were all making very great points, but I don't think that, well, first let me say, Shane, I think you are very right to ask that question of why have we not seen success since a certain time frame. In everything else we do, especially in military movements, right, or military actions, you always have an after-action assessment of whatever the action was, right? I think it would be a mistake to not look back on protests of the past, coming up to the current time, and coming up with some kind of assessment of why we are not seeing success. Because if not, then we just get caught up in the revelation of history, but kind of we lose focus of what the failures are. Because one could argue that the failure, and maybe this would be a possible answer to Shane's question. One could argue that a portion of the failure that we've seen stems from the loss of diligence that we had in those times. I mean, during the 60s, for the civil rights movement and moving, specifically underlining the Black Power movement, right? The idea was revolution, not just protest, but revolution, meaning I will die for what I believe. And in all faces on all faces of what we're protesting for now, we have a certain sense of comfort. And when you look at a lot of the civil rights movements or like the Black Lives Matter movement and things of those natures, they tend to be swallowed up by the left, by the Democratic Party. So in effect, they're working within, or unbeknownst to them possibly, but they're working on, their effort becomes an effort that's working on behalf of a Democratic Party, which has no intention on giving you the fullness of what you desire. So I think that it's very important that we do look back on history and ask, why have we not seen success since that time? And come up with some idea and be very critical, because if you don't have self-reflection, then you don't grow. And I don't want to take the time from other callers, so I'll just stop right there.
Brave. Thanks for the call. I'm still thinking about it. Jamarl, any quick response to that?
I think he's right on some level. I mean, think of it like a war. Think of it like a war. And Western troops I forget the book. I think it was Beaver or one of the books. But Beaver made this point that we can't fathom what it was like to fight on the Eastern Front in a way where there was no limits in regards to levels that the people were willing to go to win. Meaning, because it was a war of annihilation, then you giving up doesn't matter. The amount that you fight, for the most part, is going to be to the point where you die. And, there's something to be said about Western troops that believe that you fight to a certain extent, and then you fight enough where you say, okay, I'm done. And that done is enough. Meaning, I could give enough where this is what I've given to this particular task or this particular struggle. And even though it doesn't necessarily accomplish it, even though it doesn't necessarily win, it's adequate for whatever the expectations are. There's something to be said about protests and similar like that. You go out, you scream, you march, you wave your sign, and then you go home. I did my job. I did my protest. But did you? And is it valid or is it valuable if it doesn't necessarily accomplish the overarching goal, especially when the overarching goal can't accomplish by one individual or specific protest? This is kind of what Sean was saying. It's a tactic. It's not necessarily a thing into itself. It requires all sorts of other things to go along with it. It's like if you were getting some kind of intelligence. It's only one aspect of a larger infrastructure. It's the same thing. I mean, the catch becomes how far are the people willing to go for those protests? And honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with, in these days, if you don't work, you don't have these kind of secondary things to help out and everything else. This was the argument, I can't think of his name, but he made from an economic standpoint, basically saying, look, you have so many people that need jobs now, and, that those people have to work. They can't be out there protesting. On some level, it's that. Your entire world, especially from an economic standpoint, is dependent upon you being able to work, you being able to get resources, etc. And if you don't work, you're not going to be able to eat. If you get a jail record, if you get some kind of citation or something that ends up putting a felony or putting some kind of thing on your record, that could have larger consequences for your ability to be able to eat later on. Now, there's certain people who have this idea of protests, kind of like Martin Luther King, where it was something where this is a mission that needs to be accomplished. I don't see that. And until you see that, I don't necessarily know whether or not the protest in and of itself has larger changes. Does that make sense?
I would agree with that. I don't necessarily agree that revolution needs to be the end goal if you're trying to get some things done. I think that you need to have specific objectives. And I agree with Brave. I agree with you, Brave. Something like an after-action report is vital if you want to know that what you're doing is actually worthwhile. And you brought up the military there. The same drone warfare, the same remote monitoring and surveillance, the same remote management processes that the U.S. government and governments around the world now use, the way that detaches soldiers from the battlefield and adds a sense of comfort, security, and control. Same damn thing is true with modern protesting and social media activism. It's the same kind of detachment. And I don't want to make too much of a deal out of this, but there's a similar process going on there. We got Anthony calling in from Detroit.
Change.org. Change.org. It's like, hey, I signed that petition. I'm good.
I hear you. Hey, Anthony, what's going on, man?
Hey, good morning. I'll try to be real quick. Shane, you mentioned kind of somewhat in passing earlier how America is pretty much an oligarchy, masquerading as a democracy. And Jamarl, you just mentioned how part of this whole royalty, or this whole crowns issue, you'd rather not feed into it because it lends it some legitimacy. So I have a question about America and voting and participating in electoralism and how that kind of lends legitimacy to the whole idea that it's a democracy. What do you guys think about not participating in it? And then two, as an alternative to our current system of subjugation, there's kind of an idea out there that representative democracies always tend towards oligarchic nature. And so as an alternative, how would you feel about something like a confederalism of a loose alliance, or not necessarily loose, something more like the European Union, where, the states are a little bit more autonomous and everybody has the right, if you so choose, to participate in legislation. It's kind of an elective, participatory type of thing where if I want to, I can go and write laws. And we also provide the economic base to make that a feasibility for everybody. Just your opinions on that.
I like part of it. I think other parts of it could be problematic. Devil is in the details, and we this is a great conversation to have. And I'd like to get people more educated and more qualified to have that because it's a very interesting one. But thank you for bringing it up, Anthony. Interesting call, an interesting conversation to have. We got to close the show out for today. Thank you to all of our callers. Really appreciate it. Monica, I'm sorry we did not get to you again today. Please call back in. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're closing this show out. We'll see you again tomorrow morning, folks. Have a great day.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the record books. Good show today. Another good show. Spirited, as always. Let me see. Just setting up the other stuff. This show started off with a bit of a rush, because it was like this morning. There were several clips. There was a press conference that did I close it? I might have closed it. So there was a press conference that was given yesterday. Well, not yesterday. It was on March 8th. And this was by Ned Price, spokesperson, department spokesperson, State Department spokesperson. And he gives one of, quite possibly, the most ridiculous press conference in the history of press conferences. And honestly, I don't necessarily, I'm not a master on the amount of press conferences and the things that take place. But if his job is to basically not say anything, then he accomplished his job. And I suspect that probably was his job. And that's unfortunate. And even when he did say stuff, it was so weird and so warped. Like asking the guy, hey, is the Honduras president that you're calling a partner that was apparently shoving cocaine to the United States to such a degree where he said, we're going to shove it up those gringos' nose? Is that guy a partner? And it's the guy that we were responsible, or at the very least assisted, in escorting out in the coup, Elias, because he wanted to basically provide stuff for his own population and focus on poverty and those type of things. So that guy wasn't a partner to the United States, but the king of cocaine was. That guy was. Now, nobody brought up the fact that Hillary Clinton was involved in that coup. Nobody brought up the fact that Clinton basically allowed that new government to come into play without forcing the old person to come back in. No, nobody brought that up. That wasn't important. No, they just want to talk about this, not something that took place several years ago that has all sorts of context for this. Same thing with Venezuela. It's amazing. They could talk about, the New York Times would do this, where they would have an article talking about Venezuela, and then 11 paragraphs down, right here, New York Times. Biden gives Venezuela reprieve to remain in U.S. Trump had rejected. Now, the press conference basically makes the point that Biden's policy on Venezuela is basically the same as Trump's regime change. Nevertheless, they would say Venezuela is mired in one of the world's worst conditions under Maduro and blah, 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 94% live in poverty, etc. You have to go down several more paragraphs to get to the point of them talking about how $31 billion worth of resources were extracted from the country based on sanctions that the United States put into place. So $31 billion were ripped from a poor country. Now, let's also be clear that the main reason that Venezuela is having difficulty is because oil was their main product. Now, part of a colonial past, even though they weren't necessarily colonized in the way that we think of colonies. But still, with similar thing is that one resource state. Well, that one resource basically hit the skids under oil, which made their life difficult. I don't doubt that there's some level of corruption, but for fuck's sake, do we really want to get into Biden Inc.? And for all of the talk that Democrats talk about Trump being corrupt and everything else, do we really want to get into corruption in government and act as if that is a reason and justification to overthrow a government? I mean, this stuff is nonsense. What right, what reason, rationale do we have to say that we can topple the government of Venezuela? It's bullshit. And yet, the New York Times takes the point of view and takes the purview of state media as assiduously attuned to the interests of Washington as state media, and would argue as if we have some right, we have some justification. This is okay. It's not okay. It would be like, I don't know, Europe saying Nancy Pelosi was president of the United States as opposed to Donald Trump, and then running with that for the next X number of years. It's ludicrous on its face. And the New York Times will basically repeat that nonsense. I'm making the point that if you're reading the New York Times and you're looking at what the State Department is saying, those things are almost the same thing. State media by any other name. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. Thomas Barnes, more sound and fury signifying nothing without courage. I got to be honest, I don't know necessarily what that quote applied to. However, Thomas, badass. I'll see you guys a little bit later. Like, share, and subscribe. Gardno. So Garden, I think I saw Gardno in here. Gardno, that video has one of the most badass openings in the history of videos. Yes, I did check that video out. Let me find that video. I was watching that yesterday and I was like, that opening, man, there's something about the opening of that video that is so brutal, so raw, so badass, that it just has to be shown. So Gardno made a video, and apparently Gardno took part of a video that I did, going after Uyghur, I think, and I forget what it was for, but I was pissed off that day. I was greatly pissed off that day. And I cut that video just straight. I don't even think I wrote anything down. It was just kind of like, can't wait to get to the mic. I just need to get to the mic. And it was like, bam, that. On that day, this is what came out, and this is what Gardno used as the original part of his video. You're not the base dude. You're one. Wait. And Gardno, you could have used the video. You had my permission to use the video. Yeah, so this is what Gardno, hold on, came up with. All right. Hey, I'm here at Mount Shasta. We're at the UFO convention. We're sky watching at this point, hoping to see something. Keep your eyes peeled. Garden, you could have used the entire video, man. It was no issue. It was good. It was a good clip, dog. You could have used it. No issue. Garden, that was his start of the video, and good job. No, I'm fucking around with Garden. So this is the start of Garden's video. I love this video, Garden. And there's something about the way it starts that's just on point. Face, dude, you're one of the suckers that vote for him. And you're one of the suckers that tell other people to be suckers and vote for him. It is the opposite of politics. All of your complaining and all of the whining and all of the belly aching about the Democratic Party not paying attention to you, no. Cowardice commands no leverage. And the fact that you're willing to continuously tell people to unconditionally give their support, they rationally ignore you. And the fact that you don't get that, the fact that you give your audience this kind of anti-politics stuff is problematic in and of itself. You are the monsters that you're looking for. And until you get into a more adversarial headspace, that they are not your friends, that beseeching them and begging them, this subservience role, and then this acting angry and annoyed after the fact to give your audience some kind of emotional outlet as opposed to getting anything real fucking done. Until you get to that point, then nothing changes. Yes, Cenk Uygur, you, anointed by this soapbox and by the power invested in me as the biggest sucker of 2020. Congratulations. Cenk Uygur. Biggest sucker of 2020, and it continues to this day. That is such a brutal intro. Right here, he keeps going.
We're going to start with something right out of the gate that's got a lot of action in it. Yeah, Garden. I watched it. This was good.
That is a look, man. That is a brutal intro. That is a brutal intro. I watched that. I was like, whoa, that is harsh. Burned, but harsh. All right, guys. Garden, good video, man. I liked it. My wife also checked it out. She was like, yeah, you got to check it out. You got to check it out. Yeah, this is on Garden's channel. Oh, you think no, it'll be fine. I'm gonna stop it. Always act like they won't walk the street without their bodyguard. Just in case anyone is in contact with aliens, I'm open to all sorts of experimentation. Oh, I see. It has C music in it. Okay, fair enough. All right, I kill it. I make sure it's not there. Oh, CW music. Okay. How did you do it? How did you play it? All right, I'm gonna have to probably nix that part. Yeah, Guard, that's funny, man. That's funny. All right, guys, I'm gonna say like, I'm gonna say share, I'm gonna say subscribe, and I will see you guys a little bit later. So Jamarl is an alien. No. For my UFO videos, I was looking for a different intro, and for the chess videos, I was looking for a different intro, and so I started with different. There's a site I used to watch, Comic Storian. Love that site. And what he started doing was having these like intros that were like scenes from something else. It could be anything. It could be like him fighting with Captain America or something. It was just the weirdest thing ever. And so so I was like, hey, that's not a bad idea. And when I got the opportunity, I was looking around to see if we could do other stuff. I'm looking for ideas for the intros for the videos. The UFO one just seemed right for an intro. And so UFO videos get their own intro, just like the chess videos get their own intro. Trudy, MT Green tried to get the House to adjourn first thing, losing the vote. Did he? Jamarl, thank you for telling me about Operation Saucer. Lindsay, Operation Saucer was phenomenal. Anyway, your speech at the beginning, I decided to include it for the best one. Yeah, it was good. I like it. Brutal, but I like it. There's some things I watch, I'm like, fuck, that's brutal. But I like it. It's on point. What happens to the other Thomas and Stranahans? What do you mean? Oh, older Thomas and Stranahans. Who knows? Lindsay, the Operation Saucer thing is phenomenal. And look, people always say, hey, there's no research or there's no evidence. Yeah, that's just because they're not looking for it. The Brazilian military thing was phenomenal. And that guy they found dead like months after telling his story, that was basically head of the operation in order to do it. The stories that they recount are astonishing. And this was what, 1977. And that stuff is still in the black. Meaning there's like 6 hours of video footage. There's tapes, drawings, photographs, all this stuff. And I don't think some of the drawings are out. The video footage, no, that's in the black. Some of the information's in the black. But yeah, it's an astonishing case. Astonishing case. Jamarl, what do you think of the classic films They Live? I don't remember They Live. I do remember it, but I don't. I remember it, but I don't. Like, I remember the film. I have an idea, but I can't talk about it because I don't entirely remember the thing. The drawings prove everything. Well, it's not the drawings. You conveniently ignored the video. You also conveniently ignored the military staff who was freaked the fuck out, who was there. Keep in mind, this was the Brazilian Air Force. So basically, to give a brief summary, there was an area in Brazil, I forget the name of the place, starts with a C, that the residents were complaining of being attacked by UFOs. And they were basically saying they were being zapped with these kind of beams or something. This got so bad, and apparently he had so many people to leave the area, that the military was involved in trying to do an investigation. The Air Force, the Brazilian Air Force. The Brazilian Air Force researched the place for months on end. The military people were there. They were freaked the fuck out for the things that they were seeing, because they were basically seeing what the people were seeing. There's photographs of the marks that apparently were being made. These were like kind of incision marks. The doctors that were there for the Brazilian government, these people were having radiation sickness or radiation burns affiliated with being zapped or hit with whatever they're being zapped and hit with. images and photographs. Looks like two saucers on top of each other with plasma, just kind of these bright lights. Yeah, I mean, the story was pretty well tried. This was pretty straightforward. This wasn't a bullshit case. Their government actually did investigate it. Their government actually did come away with that stuff. And the guy who's in charge of that investigation tells all. And after telling all, ends up dead a few months later, supposedly hung himself. But no, they were freaked out. They were royally freaked out. They were, and some of the other stories. I mean, some of the cases where like the guards were there like grabbing, yeah, it was just extreme. That was an extreme case. But that was a case that was investigated by the Brazilian government, and that was a case where the evidence and everything else is there, straightforward. You can look on the Brazilian government website, from my understanding. The thing was amazing too, yeah. All right, I am going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks all. I'll see you guys in a few. Bye-bye.